For council provision of a night shelter and report back to the Community Development Committee in the 21-22 year with options, timeframes and cost, of a feasibility study. It's come from Councillor Johnson and it is seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Councillor.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So this is an idea that came to us through submissions from Te Hao Hine Ahu One, Women's Health Collective, Housing Advice Centre and Tenants Union. And all of them mentioned the issue with emergency housing and finding a bed for the night for people in the current environment. And so this is not something we've done before. It would be a new step for council. And so instead of going straight to a feasibility, when I asked the question of staff, how could we pursue this? Staff said that what they could do is to investigate what other councils do and to report back to community development with risks, numbers, options, timeframes, costs of a feasibility study. So if you're taking the regional sports facility plan framework here, this would be a needs assessment. This would be the needs assessment stage. So we've had the concept outline from the submitters, and this would be the pre-feasibility needs assessment. And then if it looked like it was an option, we could then decide at that point whether or not to go to a detailed feasibility. When we look at what other councils do, Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, Hamilton, Tauranga, Dunedin and Nelson all have night shelters. They're not all run by the councils though. Most of them are run by a trust with some funding from council. So there's no doubt that there is an issue with homelessness in the city, and there's certainly an issue with people who've got nowhere to sleep for the night. So all I'm asking at this stage, there's no extra budget attached to it, councillor, so that should make it attractive, is that we just request that staff look into this and report back in the course of the year with whether or not we could or should take this further.
Thank you, councillor. Look, I'm glad you added the extra bit at the end there around no extra cost to it. Look, I would question whether this is our role as a council. I certainly think we're a partner in it. I've had numerous discussions with the faith sector and churches around a city mission, and I thought we were getting somewhere with that, but COVID sort of got in the way, and I think it got in the way of planning with some of our faith-based partners. I do think that the government has a role to play here, whether it's helping fund something a bit further down the track. But I suppose there's no harm in understanding how big's the issue, getting some data on what actually is happening out on the street there. We know there is some carnage out there, and it's not, sometimes the data along with that hasn't been as good. So I'll open it up for comments. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I've seconded this recommendation really just because Councillor Dingwell's unavailable today, and so it was needing that to get this up for discussion. I'm not convinced actually that this is our role, but I am supportive of us looking at this, and as I think the Mayor's comments alluded to, there may be an opportunity for us to do a little bit of coordination or be a partner in a piece of work around this. And so I'm very open to us exploring what that might look like, who needs to be involved in that conversation. And I think as the council, we are in a unique position where we may be able to just bring people together who can make this happen. And sometimes projects like this just need somebody to do that. They don't always need somebody to put it up and pay for it and all of that. And if I think to the housing group that we established to get the conversation going in response to addressing some of the housing issues in the city, that's that's been really successful in coordinating that conversation. So there's lots of pockets of the community who have talked about a response like this, and if we can possibly be a partner in the sense of coordinating that conversation, then I'm really open to that. So happy to support this at this stage. As the mover said, there's no budget for this. It's early investigations.
If I could just comment through you, Mr. Mayor, just had a brief chat with our acting GM strategy and planning regarding where this piece of work would sit. Just because it has no budget attached, it would be a light touch because we have a full work program, as you can imagine, and things are getting added to it. So we would need to, it wouldn't be a full comprehensive piece of work if there was no budget with it. It would have to be within our resources we already have.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would be happy to advance this. My only query on the text is for council provision of a night shelter. I think that would be unneeded, and maybe just investigate options for a night shelter and report back, because I don't think it's council's role to provide it, but certainly coordinate those interested to look for the solution.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm happy to accept that, and I think we're open to how it could be provided if there's a need for it. So, yep, that's fine. You happy with that, Councillor Rutherford? Yep.
Okay, we'll just get that up. Options for a night shelter and report back. Okay. Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, I did just come out of the queue, but there has been some chatter around this through the Safety Advisory Board and the various stakeholders in that area. I think probably our role in this really is just to be the catalyst to pull together the various stakeholders to actually understand what the problem is and perhaps look at some solutions. But I'm happy to support.
All right, thank you. That's all the comments. No other comments. Technology's working because we've had a few malfunctions. Right, I'll go back for the right of reply. Back to you, Councillor.
I don't think I need one. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. All right, councillors, if we could vote, please. That's passed, 14 votes for and none against. Thank you. Right, we're on top of page 6, still on goal 3. And this is the, again, result of public consultation that a budget for the community small grants is increased by an extra $30,000 per annum. And Councillor Johnson has proposed this, seconded by Councillor Bowen. Over to you, Councillor.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So this one and the subsequent one, a lot of the arguments are the same, so I'll make them one time for this one and I'll just refer to them for the next one. So what the community has told us, and I'll quote from the Community Service Council submission, is that we recommend that Council commit to regularly increasing the funding available to support community groups. The needs in our community and the costs associated with meeting them are only increasing. Maintaining current funding levels will not be sufficient for growth in both need and in the city's population. This is especially true for organisations working in mental health, housing support and family harm, but is experienced across the board. In the post-COVID environment, clients' needs are often more complex than they've been previously and require greater or more intensive support, which is harder to quantify. So basically, the community small grants, we have got scheduled just a CPI increase for it, but in the last long-term plan, we increased it by $30,000 per annum. Now, at the time of the last long-term plan, there were 54 applicants for the Community Small Grants Fund, and the total budget had to be prorated down so that each of them got 70% of what they'd asked for. So we added $30,000. This year, there are 75 applicants, so that's an increase of 41% in applications to this fund. And the likelihood is that applications are going to have to be prorated down by 50%. So if you apply for 3,000, you only get 1.5. And these small grants are designed for our smaller volunteer organisations to be able to fund some of their expenses. So my argument here is that unless we take an approach of increasing the budget when it comes to long-term plan time, we're never accounting for the increase in population that we know we've had in the city over the last 3 years, and we're never taking into account any increased needs or any increased costs in providing those needs. So I think that now is a good moment to consider whether or not we're providing sufficient. I still don't think the extra 30,000 will meet every need of every organisation that applies to this fund. It certainly won't, but it is a step increase, which I think is warranted given the increase in population and needs that we've had over the last 3 years. What else do I need to say? I think that that's probably enough for now.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There isn't much left to say after Councillor Johnson's very thorough going through of the evidence to show why this is required. So all I will add to that is to say that, as we know, our community is increasingly diverse. And with that increased diversity comes diverse needs and complex needs that our community organisations are doing a wonderful job in responding to, but the quantum of funding just isn't there. And I'm not aiming for us to get to a point where we meet all of the funding needs particularly. I think the growth will always be ahead of where we fund, but at the moment the growth is far too far ahead of where we fund, and this needs to alter slightly, and this is the way to do it.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. For anyone who's done funding applications before, if you get 50% of what you ask for, I think that's pretty good. I think when we look at what we do in our budgets for supporting community groups, there is the step changes throughout the 10 years. We've got $2.5 million in year 1. It is over $3 million by year 10. From my perspective, it would be lovely to increase it more, but the cost is falling on those who already can't afford a 7.7% increase. So every time we make one of these decisions, that number's going to go up. And so whilst it would be nice to do this, I think we've got to actually draw a line in the sand and at some point and start saying no to some of these things, even though they're very obviously worthy of our consideration. But if we keep saying yes to everything that's put in front of us, that is a good thing to do. Our community can't afford to pay for all the good things that we would like to do for our community. So we actually have to make the hard decisions, and I think this is one of them.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would actually like to make an amendment to this recommendation, and I'd like to make the amendment that the local initiatives fund be transferred into the community small grants fund.
Do you have a seconder? Okay, you do.
My rationale behind that is that I sit on the Local Initiatives Fund, and we're now at the end of June and we still haven't allocated all that fund. And the reason we haven't allocated it is because the fund, the scope of it, there's good organisations that need it, but the terms of reference, if you like, it's just too restrictive. So there are good organisations that are coming to us, and because of the restrictions, you've got to say no. Here's a small grants fund that needs the money. Also, this has got a panel of 3. To me, it's repetition, and I've been sitting on it for the last 8 years, and it's absolutely... Many years we have not allocated the money, and it's just getting worse. So that fund sits around 26 to 30,000 K. So it would pretty much. It also wouldn't affect any organisations going forward because it's new initiatives. So We've got 1 or 2 at the moment that we're looking at, so the money's still there for this year. So to me, it would be a better proposition to merge, whatever the terminology you like, to transfer that budget into this community small grants one.
I'm just getting people chatting in my ear. Could we get some staff comment on that, please?
The funding policy review work is looking at redeploying or combining that local initiatives budget in with another fund. And I can't remember exactly which one it was. I'm not sure exactly if it was a small grants or if it was a celebrating communities. So the proposal was, currently is, that the local initiatives fund will be transferred and combined into the celebrating communities fund, which we know is heavily oversubscribed. So that's the proposal as it stands.
Sorry, if I can just add, and that was actually reported to council through the committee some time ago, a month or 2 ago, that proposal of the scoping of the policy. So I think councillors have already agreed essentially that that is to happen, the combining of those funds.
Okay.
Was news to me.
So has that decision been made?
Through the chair, apologies. So the community funding policy, I'm aware this is not really what's up discussion here, but the scoping of the policy was a briefing came to council through the Community Development Committee, I think, a month or 2 ago, proposing the scope of the policy, which is coming in draft form to strategy and planning in August. The expectation is that the envelopes will be set through this process, and then the criteria for grant making will be determined through the policy guidance. But at that stage, that was the information given to councillors, that those 2 funds are merged for the reasons that Councillor Beattie has outlined.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor, it looks like that money's already gone.
It does. For some unknown reason, I must have missed it.
Well, likewise.
Yeah.
All right.
So just on that, so it has been combined. So, sorry, can I just clarify? So it's going into the welcoming, celebrating communities, thank you.
That's correct, yeah. So the Celebrating Communities Fund was 90% committed by December, so we're getting some really high calibre applications through, so it's a heavily oversubscribed fund. And the proposal that came through to council was that given that the Local Initiatives Fund is not utilised the way it was intended, that we combine that, move that funding over to top up the Celebrating Communities budget.
Okay, thank you. I missed one of those meetings, so probably Murphy's Law, it was that one.
Councillor Naylor. Right, okay. All right, that is, back to you. That's nobody else wants to speak on this? Okay, back to you, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So just to say that, to address some of the points that were raised, there is a limit on what you can apply for to the Small Grants Fund. So the limit is you can only apply for a maximum of $5,000. So that, even if you know you're only going to get 50%, you can't apply for 10,000 and expect to get 5. You can only apply for 5, which means you're only going to get 2.5. In terms of where the rates are at, and keeping saying yes, by the order in which we've addressed the proposals, the community is, coming near the end. And if we take the view that, well, the rates have already gone up to 7.7, so we're not going to add anything now, it means community and environment don't get anything extra, but city growth and creative and exciting have taken all the pie. So I'm not buying that argument. If when we get to the end of this debate, we're not happy with where the rates are, we can go back and have a look and see if projects can be deferred or reduced. So I really don't think that community should be disadvantaged because of the order in which we're taking the amendments. And I'd just like to point out that 30 $30,000 to this fund is an 18% increase, but we know that the need has gone up 41%. So I think it's a small amount. I hope you'll support it. Thank you.
Okay, councillors, we will vote. And it's passed 13 votes for and 1 against. All right, we move to the next one, which is, again, a result of public consultation. The budget for the strategic priority grants is increased by an extra $80,000 per annum. Again, from you, Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Bowen. Back to you.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So what I noted in the submissions, both the hearings and some of the written submissions that we didn't hear spoken to, was that there were a number of community groups making requests for significant funding increases based on either new innovation of projects that they were bringing or increased need. And so I'd just like to mention 2 or 3 of those to give you an idea for the scope. So we had a very powerful submission from a community group working in Roslyn on the social needs in Roslyn and how they're really struggling in that suburb at the moment with not enough community support. We had a strong submission from Manawatu Multicultural Council about the increasing diversity of the city and how it's putting strain on the services that they provide, and they're a key partner for us in terms of what we can deliver for our city through welcoming communities. We heard from Malgra about needing to increase funding for the rainbow community. We heard from Mr Fox from Bunnythorpe about the need for community development to be focused on Bunnythorpe. We heard from a number of submitters about increasing needs in Highbury, and in particular Aura Connect, who are a key partner with us through Safe City and community wellbeing projects in Highbury. They mentioned the need for funding for around about $150,000. Now, Aura Connect are a great community organisation with a good community base and very much the sort of organisation that we'd want to be supporting. But we've taken the view as a council that instead of picking winners based on who comes to us to ask for money, that what we'll do is we'll determine the size of the pie, and community groups can then apply to that fund for budget to produce outcomes that relate to council's strategic plans around community. So rather than championing one or other community group against another one, what I'm suggesting we do is increase the strategic priority grant by about a round figure of $80,000, which won't be enough. As you can see, it's only just over half of what we've been asked for by one group. But I do think we need to do something. We need to recognise that the needs of the community are increasing, that we've had numerous submissions on this, both citywide and suburb-based, and there really is a need to do something more. So I just urge you to support this. As I say, it won't be enough, but it's something we can do.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yep, speaking obviously in support, since I seconded it, but also in support of the direction that this council has taken, that Councillor Johnson has referred to. We all get lobbied by our particular sectors. You know where you feel the need is in our sector, but you'll note that I've seconded this and I seconded the previous recommendation for small grants, but I haven't put up increases to arts events or arts initiatives or creative communities, which I could have done based on the submissions in front of us. Instead, I've taken the view that looking at those submissions, the best way to deal with that is to increase the strategic priority grants, because that puts the money in the place where officers can look at those various applications and make a decision based on their professional experience that takes it out of political game playing and point scoring. I'm very in favour of the submission, for example, from Square Edge Community Arts, who were talking about their exceptionally successful Manawatu Art Trail. which received significant government funding last year, and asking us if we would consider putting that up as a separate line item, as we have in the past for things like the Real Earth Film Festival. So I'm very supportive of that, but I've chosen not to bring it forward in that way, but instead to support a strategic priority grant process and getting the money in the right place so we make thoughtful decisions across all of our sectors. And I hope that you will make a thoughtful decision on this and support it. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just briefly, I think this is the most appropriate way to address the request from the community for an increased support. As per the comments from the mover and the seconder, this depoliticises the requests that come through, and whilst we're all connected to the community in different ways, it does sometimes mean that, which is not a negative thing, that we advocate particularly well for some groups over others. And so this takes that out. It means that it's a fair process for community groups who are coming to the council for support. And it also means that if our strategic direction changes, if we have other things that we want to focus on, then actually we ensure that we are supporting organisations in our community who are on the same page as us. They are moving in the same direction that we are, or they are supporting us to achieve the goals that we are trying to achieve. And so it doesn't become we fund something for the sake of funding it. It's actually looking at ensuring that they are working to achieve the same goals that we are trying to achieve. So I think that this is the most appropriate response to the requests from the community sector.
Is there anybody else wanting to comment?
Just for information, the last SPG round was oversubscribed by about 4 to 1. So we had to make some really tough decisions. You know, do you fund a few groups really well for impact, or do you fund many a little bit for mediocrity or for survival? Sorry.
All right. Okay, back to you. Back to you, Councillor Johnson.
I don't think I need to say any more. Thank you.
All right. We will vote now. It's passed, 14 votes for and none against. Okay, we're going to the next one, which again, result of public consultation in developing the community funding policy, the option of sector-led organisations in arts, social and environmental sectors being removed from the contestable funding model and offered a funding contract instead, similar to the arrangements in place for Sport Manawatu for the sports sector. It's explored and reported back to the committee when the policy is considered to include with their agreement Community Services Council, Environment Network Manawatu, Manawatu Multicultural Council, the Square Edge Community Arts and Creative Sounds, the Stomach. That's come from Councillor Johnson and seconded by Councillor Bowen. Councillor.
So apologies for this very wordy recommendation, which came from the result of submissions. There were a couple of strong submissions from Square Edge Community Arts and Creative Sounds, and also from Community Services Council, about being recognised as key partners in delivering our strategic goals and hoping for a more permanent funding model rather than having to go into the contestable funding environment every time. And when I looked at this more closely, Sport Manawatu, as kind of the lead organisation for sports, already has this kind of arrangement with council. And members will remember that last year, when funding cuts were being considered, no funding cuts could be applied to Sport Manawatu because we had a contract for them, but funding cuts could certainly be applied in other areas. And so the reason it says with their agreement is I haven't had the opportunity to speak to all of these organisations. Not all of them submitted for this, but what I've done is picked out the organisations that are our key strategic partners. And so there's no extra funding or anything, and there's no real decision, I suppose, at this stage. It's more a recommendation that when we consider the community funding policy, that we have some advice from staff about whether or not this is a feasible option and perhaps some of the advantages and disadvantages, because although I thought the submissions made a good case, there may be a downside to this that I haven't considered. So this is simply an agreement that this option be explored and be brought back to us when we consider the community funding policy. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Yes, absolutely. Not looking for a decision here, just a referral to that piece of work that is well in train at the moment. This isn't a new submission. Creative Sound certainly have been consistently asking for us to look at a more sustainable, certain funding arrangement for as long as I've been on council, and probably before that, because some elected members will remember that in before strategic priority grants, the thing we did before, Creative Sounds had their funding cut significantly, and it didn't go down well, and we have ended up reinstating that funding pretty smartly as a result of community feedback on it. Which is not to say that that was a bad decision, but it was just one that we couldn't front in the community. And that was a scarring experience for that organisation. When Square Edge Community Arts had their funding reviewed last time through strategic priority grants, even though that funding was eventually in some way reinstated, in the short term it resulted in redundancies for that organisation. That's not sustainable funding, and we need to have a look at how we deal with those lead sector organisations. As we heard from Sport Manawatu this morning, all of these organisations work across the region. They deliver important partnership for us into these sectors, and we don't want to see them fail. So we need to work with them to deliver sustainable funding.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Very much in support of what is brought to us here. Certainly resonates well with the feedback I've gotten from these sort of community groups. I think there's quite a compelling logic around looking at the good, effective model that we have with the sports sector and making that more broadly available to other sector coordinating groups. Honestly, I don't think any of us could look at the future of this community without the presence of those organizations delivering services. It's just not actually in the optional space, and so why not actually platform it with a level of certainty that actually I think will allow them to leverage both better funds and better outcomes for the community with this sort of model.
No other comments? Back to you, Councillor, for right of reply.
I'll just sum up by saying what's good for sport is good for everyone.
All right, we'll vote. That's passed, 14 votes for and none against. All right, we move to the next one. Again, as a result of public consultation, that the CE establish a seniors reference group to liaise between the seniors in our community and council that have a terms of reference of the group that developed and reported back to the Community Development Committee in the 21-22 year, brought to us by Councillor Johnson and Councillor Finlay.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So briefly, the senior sector is really feeling that they want to be able to have more of a voice liaising with council about things like feeding back to us on policy, giving advice in relation to communications, engagement, consultation with older people, and helping council promote the benefits of positive ageing. And the model of the reference group has worked well for the disability reference group, and I think seniors have seen that. They've seen some of the advantages of that group, and that's why they're asking for that for themselves. So I did put a question into staff about costs involved. They feel that there wouldn't be any extra cost, at least, to set this up. The first step would be to establish terms of reference. So it's a new thing that has a new idea that's been brought to us, but it is based on a model that we know works. And there are many other cities that do this. It's a very popular idea in Australia, funnily enough. I was doing some research on it. There are lots of senior reference groups for municipalities in Australia. So no extra budget, councillors, but a chance for better liaison with the senior sector, which is an important sector for us and is only getting bigger. Thank you.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you. Yeah, the age-friendly Palmerston North, they support this to the max. The older people in Palmerston North want to talk to council and want the councillors to understand what's it like to live on a minimum amount of money, what it's like to be slow, what it's like to be older, and they're very much aware that the council in general is not sympathetic towards older people in the city. Age Friendly has tried to come to council a bit, but they can't come every time because it's a totally different group of people doing different things. A reference group would be, firstly, this council are recognising that approximately 40% of our people are considered older people. It's the fastest growing group of people in this city. They are the most vulnerable in the city most of the time. And it gives the older people in this city an opportunity to come to council and say, this is wrong or this is right, without having to come to council itself. Any individual could come along to the reference group and say, I'm having a problem with this. Can you help me with council? At the moment, we don't have that. We do with the disability sector, and it's very effective. I think we also should do it with the age sector, which is a growing sector in this community.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to support this recommendation. I think the work of the age-friendly cities group has turned a little bit into a de facto seniors reference group, and there has been certainly community groups are looking to them to provide a bit of a voice, but the work that they are doing is a little bit more niche around actually trying to work on the accreditation. So I think it makes sense to keep that separate. There's most certainly likely to be crossover from people who are involved in both because it's quite an active group of people. But I do think it's appropriate to establish a seniors reference group. As it's been explained, it worked particularly well with the disability reference group and ensuring that we capture the voice of a particular group in our community. I think with, Palmerston North is a young city. Our median age, though it has just creeped up a little bit, is still 33. And so, half of our population are younger. We need to make sure that we capture the voice of particular groups. And this is a really good avenue of doing that. And also ensuring that we've got a really clear opportunity for engagement on issues that are particularly relevant to this group of people. So I'm happy to support this, and obviously there's some other similar recommendations coming forward as we get to them. I think that we want our community to feel like their voice is represented in a way and their voice is considered. So this makes sense.
Right, no other comments? Back to you, Councillor, for any right of reply?
No, I think that's okay, thank you.
Good, thank you. We'll vote. It has passed, 14 votes for, none against. Right, we move to the next one, and again, as a result of public consultation, the CE works with Melgra to identify suitable safe drop-in space for members of the Rainbow community, including our own council buildings or facilities. So that's come forward from Councillor Johnson and seconded by Councillor Bowen. Over to you.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So this and the one that follows it, come as a result of the submission from Malgra, which is the Manawatu Lesbian Gay Rights Association, which is the oldest LGBTQ rights organisation in the whole of New Zealand. And so what we've been asked for is that staff help the community identify a suitable, safe drop-in space. So what do we mean by that? And a few members have asked me, well, what is this? It's basically somewhere where someone can go to and know that they're going to get a good response from the person that they see on the other side. So it may be difficult for us to understand if we're not in this group, but it is a very marginalised community. So what we know is that the Human Rights Commission report last year said that members of the rainbow community continue to suffer from discrimination and harm, and that school and work are often unsafe places for members of this community. And the Counting Ourselves survey, which was done for trans and non-binary people, 67% had experienced discrimination. 67%, and much higher stats for sexual assault, for being victims of violence and suicide and so on. So the idea of a safe drop-in space is a place where people can go where they know that they're going to be met with a safe environment, they're not going to be judged, where they can find support. Staff, when asked about this, responded in the questions that it might be that a space might be able to be found in Community House. And certainly there is a view that the community facilities are going to be reviewed. The reason I've put including our own council buildings is not to limit this to just Hancock House or somewhere else, but in fact that there may be a space amongst many of the many buildings that council owns that could be purposed for this. So there's no extra cost involved, councillors. It will be members of the community development team working with Malgra to identify, first of all, what the needs of such a space would be, and then to look to see if such a space could be provided. So I would ask you to support it, and I acknowledge the members of Malgra who are here to listen to the debate. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So speaking in support of the recommendation and recognising the work, long-standing work, as referenced by Councillor Johnson, that Malgra have done to provide support to the rainbow community of Palmerston North over many, many years. Our rainbow community have poorer mental health and physical health outcomes than the regular population. They're twice as likely to experience sexual or family harm. Providing safe spaces is absolutely critical for this section of our community. And Malgra are here, I think, because they don't normally come asking for us to help. They've got on proactively themselves, looking after their community. They've found a home over the years in Square Edge, in the old dance studio. They find a home at the moment for some of their activities through Te Manawa. They've done all of this by themselves, and that should be commended. But at this point, they've run out of being able to find a solution through their own networks, and they're asking council for a very small amount of help, and I think we can do that.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and certainly do support this. My, I guess, brings out the editorial side in me, though, just to ask the mover if we might hyphenate drop-in just to make it absolutely clear what we mean.
Yep, that's fine, thank you.
Any other comments? There being none, back to you, Councillor.
Well, I just ask for your support because I think that, as Councillor Bowen has mentioned, you know, we don't often have Malgra coming to ask for stuff, and this isn't a very big thing that we can provide in terms of cost, but it will make a big difference to members of that community. Thanks.
All right, councillors, we will vote. That is passed 13 votes for with 1 abstention. Okay, we now go to the next one, which is again as a result of public consultation, that an elected member from the People and Community portfolio is appointed to be the designated contact person for Marlborough, and that the Rainbow communities added to the terms of reference for that portfolio. Again, come to us via Councillor Johnson and seconded by Councillor Bowen. Over to you, Councillor.
So just briefly to follow on, the request has come that the Rainbow community be specifically recognised as a community of interest under the People and Community portfolio. So we already have a number of communities of interest listed under that portfolio, and this would just be adding that one to the terms of reference. There's already a very well-established practice of appointing elected members to organisations across the city as contact people. Councillor Petrinas is on the Hoffman Kiln, and, I'm on Square Edge, and Councillor Butt is on Manawatu Multicultural Council. And so this is a request for an elected member to be the designated contact person for Marlborough, so that there's better communication between council and their community. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you. And to reflect that this is actually just making policy what is our current practice. The People and Community portfolio has been very engaged with Marlborough. Marlborough are very assiduous in inviting us to attend events, and I think are very happy with the amount of commitment and contact they have with elected members. So this is just seeking to formalise what we already actually do.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm very supportive of this. I would just like to move an amendment, or perhaps the mover may accept it, to amend the word designated to lead. And that's just purely from a point which I plan on moving the same amendment for a similar recommendation coming up. Just understanding that the way we are all elected as representatives of the community, and I don't want to silo people who are in the community feeling like there is only one elected member that they can approach. And whilst we know, in particular with the Rainbow community, that there's interaction with a lot of elected members, I just want to make it really clear that there may be a lead contact person, but that doesn't preclude engagement with anyone else. And I think if there is a designated contact person, it's a little bit more specific around that being the person. So either I'm happy to move that as an amendment, or the mover maybe.
No, I'm happy to make that change if the second is happy. Yep. Quite happy to have my recommendations edited in a positive way.
Anybody else wishing to speak? Okay, back to you for Rada.
I don't think I need it, thank you.
Okay, we will vote. It's passed, 14 votes for, none against. Okay, again, as a result of public consultation, that the city establish a Pacifica reference group to liaise between the Pacifica community and council, and that the terms of reference of the group are developed and reported to the Community Development Committee in the 21-22 year. It's come to us via Councillor Johnson and seconded by Councillor Bowen. Over to you, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just to be clear that this was originally Councillor Dingwall's recommendation and the following two, but because she's not able to attend today's meeting, I'm speaking on her behalf. So she's sent me some notes, which I'm going to read. The Pacifica Reference Group, what she's said is that it's been one of the first times that Pacifica Community has come to us to make a submission, and most of us are aware that the Pacifica community is a vulnerable community that doesn't always have the same access to services and opportunities as other communities, and often, unfortunately, subject to negative stereotypes. Traditionally, being humble is a massive part of the culture, so it's quite a step for them to come to council and ask for something. But this year we were able to engage with some of the Pacifica community, and they came to our decision-making table asking for support, and that in itself means that these requests are important to this community. The Pacifica reference group, Councillor Dingwall has suggested, is really trying to give effect to the Connected Communities strategy. Pacifica reference groups are used by other councils around the country, so there are examples we can draw on, and it would help us understand how policies and decisions impact on Pacifica communities. So there were a number of comments in the submission around whether or not we had enough visibility for Pacifica. And so, I mean, I'm not going to read, Councillor Dingwall has sent me quite a lot of stuff. I'm not going to read it all for time. But ultimately, the same arguments that we have for other reference groups, I think, apply here. I think that this is a step forward in terms of being able to engage in a very authentic way with a group that does need particular attention. And so I'd urge you to support this. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you. I was delighted to be promoted into seconding the recommendation, which was before Councillor Johnson in the seconder spot. My reflection on this, as with the seniors group, this is just good engagement. Our community are recognising that this is a model that's working, and those sectors of the community who proactively want to engage with council are finding this as a way that they can do it. And I think it costs us very little and gives us good networks into those communities, so it's worth doing.
Anybody else wishing to comment? There being none, back to you, Councillor, for a right of reply. We will vote. Has passed 14 votes for, none against. All right, next one, again as a result of public consultation, that an elected member from the People and Community portfolio is appointed to be the designated contact person for the Pacifica community, and that the Pacifica community is added to the terms of reference for that portfolio. From Councillor Johnson and Councillor Bowen. Over to you, Councillor.
If we can just alter designated to lead as per the previous comment. Thank you, if you're happy with that, Councillor Bowen. I mean, I don't think I need to say a lot here. It's the same consideration that under People and Community portfolio, we've got a terms of reference. It doesn't specify Pacifica. I think it should. So does Councillor Dingwall, and so I'd ask you to support that.
All right, any comments? Okay, there being none, right of reply? No. Okay, we will vote. That has passed 14 votes for and none against. Thank you. Okay, the next one is so this is again result of public consultation, and it sort of applies to some of the motions that we've just been going through, and I think one that's to come, that the Pacifica Centre Facility submission and the Manawatu Cultural House submission be referred to the Council's Community Facilities Review. That's coming from myself as the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor. Councillors, as you're aware, we have a facilities review coming to us. These two projects, I think, are, rather than going ad hoc and adding numbers, dollar values to it, let's see what comes out of that, and it may be something quite different. In terms of the Pacifica one, I know a little bit about that. Of course, the Papiaoia Pacifica Trust are the tenant of that Bill Brown Park Community Centre there, and they were a big player in the redesign of that a few years ago. They cannot get all of their community in that facility, but nor do they want to do that the vast majority of the time, because they're made up of 9 different islands, nations. and they utilise different facilities, like for National Days. Fiji National Day was an example where Councillor Butt and myself participated in, and 400 people turned up to that one, which was quite amazing. So look, we just don't know what the real needs are, so I think we should be referring this to this review. I think that's the sensible thing to do. So I'd like your support on this. The Manawatu, the MMC Multicultural House, I think is a very exciting project for us, especially with the new Ministry of Ethnic Communities being stood up in about 2 weeks down in Parliament. This city is being viewed extremely positively in that ministry, and I do think there's a real opportunity to hero up that whole sector with their own space. But again, it needs proper understanding of what that could look like. So if you could look at this quite favourably, I think it's we've already got it in our work plan, and that's where I think these two things should sit. Thank you. I'll open it up for any comments. Councillor Johnson.
It's just a quick question, really. If this passes, does the subsequent recommendation about a feasibility study for Pacifica Centre at Bill Brown Park just become redundant?
One would think so, yes.
Yeah. I just wanted to clarify that so that people are clear. Speaking on behalf of myself, I think that this is good process. I think that it's clear from the MMC submission that they're struggling for space. And as well as that, we know that there are lots of cultural organisations that are members of MMC that don't have any space at all for them to call their own. In terms of the Pacifica Centre, I think it would be useful for us to have a better understanding before we put in money for a feasibility. I should say, though, that Councillor Dingwall, who has proposed the subsequent one, does still strongly feel that it would be better to have the feasibility, and because she feels that that will give us more detail as to what's actually needed and how much it will cost. So I think in terms of this, if this goes through, then the feasibility study that's been proposed afterwards would not would be out of scope, basically. So just think about that when you're voting. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question, if I might, around the time frame here of the community facilities review, when we'd expect to have information back.
I'm just going to look to the officers and they're going to reply.
Through the chair, so the 1898, the famous 1898 program is for a 1-year position of a staff person to do a citywide high-level review. So obviously until that money is adopted, we won't be able to start recruiting towards that. So I'm imagining it will be a year 1 project, but with a lag. So the reporting will happen in year 2.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anybody else wishing to comment? Good. All right, just in terms of right of reply, I mean, it's all been said. The only thing I would say, I've had some mixed messages about what is actually required at the Pacifica Centre, so that's why I'm feeling like it needs a little bit more teasing out. It may get to a separate feasibility, remembering we only reopened it 2.5 years ago. So, yeah. Okay, if you could vote, please. That's passed, 14 votes for, none against. Thank you. That means the next one's gone. Now we're moving at pace here, this is great. We now go to, again, a result of public consultation. That program 1941, library fines, removal for youth and children, starts from year 1. This came out of, I think, questions yesterday. So that's brought forward by Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Bowen. Back to you, Councillor.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So this is a programme which, when adopted, removes library fines for youth and children. And in the supporting material, it starts from year 3, although in the consultation document, it said it would be from years 1 to 10. So my recommendation is that we start it from year 1. So that would involve 2 extra years of money, $40,000 in year 1 and $41,000 in year 2, which is loss of income rather than money that we pay for doing something. So why should we do this? Well, basically, we've had a number of submissions, 6 in fact, in favour of this, and it's supported by the Public Libraries New Zealand, who've explained that it's now considered to be best practice in libraries not to charge fines for youth and children, because it helps eradicate barriers and helps improve access to literacy. And basically what they've said is that your library exists to meet the needs of the community with the greatest needs, and basically overdue fines create barriers to access for the very population that the library exists to serve, and they're actually not an effective tool to encourage on-time return rates. So when I had a look at what segments of the community would this most impact on, we have got 4 areas of the community that are social deprivation level 9 or 10. So that's the most extreme levels of deprivation: Roslyn, Awapuni, Palmerston North Central and Highbury. All of those have branch libraries. And so it's very important to the children in those suburbs that they're not effectively barred from borrowing books because they can't afford to pay the late fines. So there is evidence that this works to increase access. So in Wairarapa, when this was introduced, they had 1,000 more checkouts in a 2-month period in a single branch. And in Upper Hutt, the usage of the library went up 8%. And I think that this programme really is important for us in being able to provide equitable access to facilities. Because what we have to remember is that overdue fines basically disproportionately affect people in low-income households, and in particular children who have got no say over how the household budget is spent. Anecdotally, I hear that some schools in the town are reluctant to have the mobile library bus because some of their tamariki have too many fines to be able to take out books. So there's lots of benefits from this: increased use of library, improved literacy, general goodwill from residents, and just in case you're wondering whether or not library fines do really contribute to people not using the library, a study in Upper Hutt showed that 3,126 people with fines of which averaged $13.48, did not use the library in the 2-year period after those fines. So I think that this would be a very fine example of universal access that we should bring in as soon as possible and not wait for year 3. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm very supportive of this recommendation. I think that library fines are a huge barrier for participation, not just for the children and young people that may carry those fines, but actually the impact on the wider family. We've heard certainly out in Asher's first-hand accounts of families who won't go to the library because their kids have got a fine of $7 or $8, but actually when it comes down to budgeting your last cent, prioritising $7 or $8 over pulling something out of the grocery budget is just not a conversation that they can have. So I know that staff have an element of discretion and probably apply that very well, but certainly the comments that Councillor Johnson's raised, particularly from the Hutt study, has shown that that it makes a direct impact, and when barriers are removed, then participation increases. So we went out with our consultation document. There was an error in there which has been identified that it didn't actually correlate through to the supporting material. This recommendation actually just amends that and tidies it up to reflect what was in our consultation document, which the majority of people who engaged with our 10-year plan would have just looked at that. And so we need to be really clear that that would have been the premise of what the understanding was around this program. And so this fixes that issue.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's always good to second things for Councillor Johnson because you don't have to talk a lot. But I do support this and have supported it all the way through. And in fact, until yesterday, I was of the impression that we were doing it. But that's what we said to our community. That's what they're expecting. When we've talked about that as part of the consultation process, it's been very well received. So it would be a shame to walk that back now because of an administrative error, and I'd ask you to support it.
Okay, right, a reply back to you.
Well, I don't really want to add anything, just to say that I felt that the Deputy Mayor and Councillor Bowen made some very apposite remarks.
All right, we will vote. It's passed 14 votes for and none against. All right, our last of our goal threes is, as a result of public consultation, that the Chief Executive report back on the implications of implementing a diversity and inclusion policy specifically targeted at addressing racism and discrimination in our community. That's come from Councillor Mickelard and seconded by Councillor Johnson. Councillor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And can I just also say thanks to Councillor Johnson for seconding this recommendation. It's always been said that all politics is local and that local issues do call for a local response. And I, for one, cannot think of a better place or local institution for us to sort of lead the way in addressing this issue. Palm is increasingly becoming diverse, and in fact, we are one of the most culturally diverse provincial cities in New Zealand, and the ethnic mix of our city continues to grow. We lead and serve a community that is made up of various people from different backgrounds, and as a council, we have a commitment and statutory obligation to finding ways or equitable solutions to social problems and finding ways of working together with different communities. During the submission hearings, we heard from various community groups who have expressed their concerns at the growing level of racism and discrimination that they are experiencing in the community. These groups have suggested the adoption of a local action plan specifically targeted at addressing racism and discrimination in our community. And this includes members of the disability community, migrants, refugees, and people from Pacific background, or even our indigenous people and religious minorities. We do have a number of plans in place. For example, we have an active citizenship plan. We have a healthy community plan, which sets out our commitment to promote our healthy lifestyles, and including smoke-free. We also have community services and facilities plan, which sets out ways in which we support people to learn and connect with others. But we tend to have, we do not have specific measures or a plan to address racism and discrimination in our community. This recommendation provides just for that, and a report back will be useful, and a report back will with useful information on how to best deal with this issue now at a community level. Will actually provide us with a good informed decision making as to how we should look at this issue in the future. And I also believe that this will go a long way in providing us with useful information for future decision making, especially in support of promoting better race relations and strengthening cultural identity and multicultural communities in this city, and also responding to the needs of our most vulnerable, particularly disability communities and LGBT and migrant communities. Thank you. And
Councillor, just a couple of questions from me. So, do you not believe Welcoming Communities is already doing this work?
Welcoming, if I may probably just highlight, welcoming communities was not designed to do this kind of work. And as a former refugee who's benefited from welcoming refugees, it does not specifically actually target racism or discrimination in the community. Welcoming communities is simply a program that brings together the council and the community to welcome newcomers, and does not specifically deal with the issue of racism or discrimination. Now, this is nothing new in local body politics. We have a number of councils who are actually leading the way in designing some of these policies or putting some of these plans in place. Auckland Council is doing work on it as well. Christchurch City Council, especially in light of the March 15 terrorist attack, and Wellington City Council. This is not a political issue. It is an issue of fairness, and also in seeing how we can actually deal with the various communities that we have, having a plan in place to sort of help make Palmerston North a more desirable place to live and thrive for those communities that are actually experiencing racism and discrimination in our community.
Thank you for the very long answer. I have been involved right at the pointy end of welcoming communities, and it actually does address discrimination, or tries to break down some of the barriers. Can I ask again, how would this policy, isn't it a double up of some of that work? I'm just trying to think what you're trying to achieve with the policy, and how we could, what are the tools that would come? I'm just struggling with how we do this.
I don't, through the chair, I personally do not believe that this is a double up of anything. And I, for one, would say, for example, we do not have educational programs, for example, in place to sort of improve cultural awareness, in the sense that, I mean, not necessarily cultural awareness, but we do not have specific measures in place in addressing this issue, especially around racism or discrimination, specifically around racism and discrimination. And I repeat, I, for one, benefited from the welcoming communities, and the program does not do that.
Okay, and you made a comment that there's been increasing racism here, and again, I just struggle with, I mean, I'm not saying that your comments aren't true and everything else, but can you give us some examples where that's coming from?
Mr. Mayor, well, you might not have experienced racism or discrimination, but let me tell you, there are members from different ethnic backgrounds who are actually experiencing racism and discrimination every year, every time, wherever they go. There's not only members from different backgrounds, per se, as like refugees or migrants, but you do have people, for example, who have disabilities, who face discrimination wherever they go. So that racism or discrimination has many forms. I could be walking into a shop and I'm black. Someone will probably think that I'm entering the shop just to steal, for example. So there's a stereotype, for example, for people who look like me, for example. So having a policy or plan in place, just like we have a plan in place for healthy communities, whereby it's specifically set a commitment for ensuring that our communities are healthy, I believe that we should also have a racism and discrimination policy in place, specifically targeted at educating members of the public in how to deal with people from different backgrounds, or also promoting race relations or cultural diversity.
And you made the comment that it's increasing here, is it? Mm-hmm. Okay. I'll open it up for questions. Oh, sorry, did you want to make a comment?
Just a comment, and just to preface the comment, it's in no way a reflection on the importance of this issue, but I think in terms of the suggested recommendation, reporting back on the implications of implementing a policy is potentially a little bit challenging when we don't understand, the contents of the policy and what the council sees as its role. So a possible suggestion to consider is a a workshop where the council discusses potential methodologies, including a policy, but there may be other methodologies such as a marketing campaign, communications messages, the way we run facilities, those sorts of things. So something for you to consider.
Sure.
Okay, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Probably a question along similar lines to the officer. I'm trying to understand what the resolution's trying to achieve. From your comments, I'm ascertaining that actually this is about behaviour change in our city, and the recommendation as it stands is to report back on the implications of implementing a policy, and I would assume that the implications would actually just be behaviour change or positive change, and so I'm wondering if that is needed, or if we can refer it to a workshop or a I don't want to say a feasibility study, a step before creating a policy rather than needing the implications of implementing. I'm just having trouble with the wording, and I wondered if you could comment on that.
Yeah, sure. Councillor.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, as the seconder, I did put a question through around looking for officer comment on the pros and cons, if you like, of us developing an anti-racism strategy, because I'm aware that sometimes drawing attention to things actually makes it worse. And so I think that's some of what was intended in the implications of implicating, because officers replied that they couldn't provide this information because the request would require significant additional work. I mean, I take on board the GM's comments around the workshop, but I think, speaking for myself, what I took from the submissions was that there are a number of groups in the city that have drawn our attention to racism as an issue. And though I myself felt that the Welcoming Communities programme was providing enough anti-racism input, clearly the community doesn't feel that. And as someone who doesn't personally experience racism, I'm not really in a position to, naysay their personal experience. And so, in conversation with Councillor Mickelard, we decided we don't want to go straight out and say we need this policy, I guess, but we are wanting to know how can we address this issue that the community has brought to us in a more specific way that does address behaviour change, but also enables those communities that are the targets of racism and discrimination to see that we're taking their experience seriously and trying to do something about it. So I think perhaps a workshop on ways forward would be fine also, certainly for me. I'll let Councillor Mickelard say what he's thinking.
Sure. Yes, thank you very much for the comments as well and the feedback. I do want to also agree. There are many ways of dealing with this issue. There's not one formula to deal with racism or discrimination. There are many ways of approaching the issue, whether through a workshop and that sort of things. But what was actually coming from the community, especially the Brazilian community, the Chinese community, hearing those submissions, and also the Manawatu Multicultural Association, for example, just hearing those submissions, clearly we have an issue. And I mean, I understand many of you might be uncomfortable talking about this particular thing, but I, for one, actually saw that this is an opportunity for us to sort of do a bit of research on this and report back on, what the implications of such and how we approach this might actually, how can this be implemented, for example, whether it's through workshop, marketing campaigns. I'm open to any of those suggestions, but what I want actually was for us to have a report back on the implications of having such a policy in place or a plan in place, and see how we can address this issue going forward.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think Councillor Mickelad is absolutely correct when he said this is a difficult and sensitive subject to discuss, and we should be grateful to our community who, through submissions, brought their lived experience into this chamber. I think what I took away from those submissions is that our preferred approach as council, which is often towards subliminal messaging and marketing, isn't having that cut through in the community, that people feel we're taking a strong position in addressing racism and discrimination. I think I would like to look at amending the recommendation in front of us. So we simply say that the Chief Executive provide a workshop on addressing racism and discrimination in our community. And I think from that, a piece of work might flow out, but at the moment we need to do some scoping, and this is a step too far at this stage for me. So I would seek to put that, I'll put that to the mover and seconder and say, would you accept that amendment? Otherwise, I'll move it as an amendment.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I actually wanted to actually put in, if we're to amend it, that I report back on, that the Chief Executive actually reports back on options, for example, to address racism. In that, we might have a mixture.
Mr. Mayor, I don't want to report back at this stage. I want a workshop, so I'll move that as an amendment if the mover is determined on that.
Let's make it clear. We'll make it an amendment, and then it doesn't put you in a difficult situation.
So I'm just striking out from that, so that the Chief Executive, and then strike out everything down to addressing racism, and put in provide a workshop on.
Okay, we'll get that up first.
For the community, an amendment. I'm not getting the sign language.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor. May I ask a question? Is that a workshop for elected members or a workshop for the community?
Oh, I meant for elected members.
Okay, thank you.
Didn't know. And I think the Deputy Mayor indicated she would second.
Okay, and that's from Councillor Bowen and the Deputy Mayor. All right, do you want to speak to that? We're dealing with the amendment first, and then we'll go back to the substantive. Do you want to speak to that any further?
I've explained my thinking. I don't disagree with the recommendation. I think it's a step that comes after having a workshop.
Yeah. Deputy Mayor, are you okay? I'll just make a comment. Look, I think this is the best way to deal with it. I was trying to get somewhere with the Welcome communities perhaps doing this work, or expanding on what they do. But look, let's find out what that may look like with a workshop on this. I'll leave it at that, and I'm more happy to support this. I think it's a better way. Does anybody else want to speak on this? Councillor Naylor.
Yeah, thank you. I'm actually not going to support the amendment. I would like to support the substantive motion that Councillor Mickeled originally put up. And my reason for that is there's absolutely nothing to stop the Chief Executive having a workshop with elected members prior to reporting back on this if she thinks that would be beneficial or advantageous. But what I'm concerned about is that without the report back, it can just disappear into a conversation behind closed doors. And I think this has come up from the community. The report back and the implications and whatever the plan is that we have going forward needs to be, the discussion needs to happen in this room. We need to be really clear about that. So I'll be opposing the amendment but supporting the substantive motion.
Okay, anybody else want to speak to the amendment? Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, I'm quite happy to support the amendment that's been proposed, and we can't water down the importance of the issue, and I think that just has to be accepted. But the only suggestion I've got is that through this process here, which is now proposed, it possibly belongs sort of under the umbrella of the Safe City. So it's just a suggestion in terms of how that workshop might in fact actually progress.
Well, it's good that we're having people jockeying for position, wanting to do all this is good. Yeah. And the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think that the amendment is the tidiest way forward in terms of actually creating some action or some form of a response to the submissions that we've heard. And certainly the intent that I heard from Councillor Mickleb was actually to raise the issue and to ensure that as an organisation we responded to the concerns raised by the community. I appreciate the comments that Councillor Naylor made around that it could be seen to be taking the accountability side of things away, but actually I just can see this becoming a very messy conversation. I think that there are going to be many ways that we could move forward in tackling some of these issues, and if we were to bring this directly to the council chamber, I just imagine it as amendment after amendment or suggestions, and actually I think that providing a workshop is going to enable a forum where we can look at what other councils are doing, but also or other organisations in the community. We can look at who needs to be a part of this conversation and tease out some ideas. I don't think that we are losing any level of accountability, because certainly anything in terms of policy creation or budgets, anything like that, a formal response is still going to need to come through the council chamber. So I don't think that we're losing that. If anything, I think that we're giving a platform to make sure that we actually address this and thoroughly have a conversation around teasing out what our options are to respond. So I think that this is the tidiest way forward to actually look at some solutions.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's just unfortunate in some ways that this has got so much attention, because in many ways I feel like we've celebrated our multicultural society and celebrated the languages, the cuisine, the costume, and for many years. And with the submissions coming up, if there was some indication around the discrimination and racism being raised, I must have missed it, so I must apologise that it wasn't emphasised in the submissions that I attended or read. However, I'm happy for this to go to a workshop. I just want to give it balance, that it's not overweighted, that we've got a lot of this happening and it's really causing issues, and but I want to be proactive in the fact of supporting the way forward, and so acknowledge it can be an issue, and this is the best way forward. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go back to the right of reply to you, Councillor Barton.
I'm not actually entitled to a right to reply for an amendment, Mr Mayor, but I would like to make a final comment if you would extend.
You are.
Oh, am I? Excellent.
Yeah.
We've changed standing orders. Wonderful. I just want to respond to the comments of Councillor Dennison there, because I think what I heard in this chamber is that there is racism and discrimination in our community. And a friend who's much wiser and more experienced in these matters than me just said something the other day, where he said, when talking to these marginalised communities, as a majority community, we've embraced the performances of that community without embracing their pain. And that's exactly what Councillor Mickleb has raised here in this community, in this forum, that we can't just take the good from communities and ignore the issues. It's beholden on us as the representatives of all of our community to hear their voice and to take those concerns seriously. And I think this is the best way of doing it.
All right, councillors, on that note, we will vote on the amendment. That is passed, 12 votes for and 2 against. Now, before we, does anybody else want to comment on the substantive? Yeah. So this is is now the substantive, with including the amendment. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and just briefly to comment by way of example, and I think that one of the items in the hearings of submissions this year that really landed for me was hearing from the Chinese community. They did an incredible amount of research across a wide range of needs of that community, things around transport, things around housing, etc. They were asked very specific questions in this chamber about what life was like during and after COVID and the response was sobering. There are recent and emerging issues that we, as a council, would do well to be in front of.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Before I go back, yep, look, I'll be honest, I spend a lot of time in the multicultural community. In fact, I'm speaking at an event tonight. Unfortunately, I was in the chamber when the Chinese Association came and spoke, who I know well, and I'm just was, and maybe a bit naive, I was unaware of recent issues. Don't get me wrong, I know there's been lots of past issues in this country's record in that space, especially with the heritage poll tax trust is very sobering. But look, I think this is addressing this well, and I think to have a workshop to understand what are the ways that we can make things a lot better for the people that are really being affected and have commented, and then bringing it into the public arena in ways that we can address it, I think is probably the best way to go. So I'm much more happier to address to vote for this positively. Before I go back to you, Councillor McLeod, Councillor Johnson.
Just to say that you only have to look at the comments on Council's social media about some of the recent artwork in the city to get an idea of the level of racism in the community. And welcoming communities doesn't address racism towards Māori. And we're seeing quite a lot of that. Whilst, I'll vote for a workshop because that's what's on offer now, I'm hoping to see much more tangible actions come out from this that we can actually embrace.
Okay, back to you, Councillor McLeod, if you wish to comment.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks very much to my colleagues for all the comments and the positive feedback on this recommendation. And I'm happy to support the recommendation as it is because that's what we have on offer at the moment. But like Councillor Johnson just alluded to earlier, I'd like to see more tangible actions, not just lip service. We cannot just celebrate people's cultures, during our biggest festivals and not actually give moral, mental assent to the issues, the cries, the grievances, or the experiences that they're facing. I, for one, can actually attest to the level of racism that I encountered throughout the course of my short lifespan, and during the election, where I was actually questioned whether I was Kiwi enough, or whether I belong here, that sort of things. And these are some of the things a lot of people face, but based on the way they look, the color of the skins, and also could be their religion and how they operate, that sort of thing. So I'm very happy to support the motion as it is, and I look forward to constructing a pathway to address this issue going forward. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, councillors. We will vote. And it's passed 14 votes for and none against. Thank you. Right, we're now on to goal 4. I'm going to look to break after 3. I think we need it. But we're on the last page, councillors, page 7, obviously. Goal 4 now. And as a result of public consultation, that program 1145, green corridors be increased to 90,000 in year 1 with the inflation adjustments in year 2 to 10 for purchase of canopy tree seedlings and increased maintenance. That's brought to us by Councillor Barrett, seconded by Councillor Johnson. Over to you, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this arises directly from the submission of the Green Corridors Group. As we're well aware at this table, a successful and long-standing project in this city that has restored riparian habitats. The new issue that they brought to our attention, and that's what's driven this need for a $30,000 increase or increment from where they are, is that a lot of their younger trees or shorter lifespan trees are now at maturity, and they're needing to replace those trees with longer-lived trees that really form genuine canopies over time. And they're quite clear about the cost differentials of those trees. So really, this is imperative on us that we do actually make this investment to support that group. Otherwise, we end up risking going backwards at a great rate of knots in terms of the whole project that's been delivered now over more than 10 years. And I don't think we want to be in a position of seeing that lost. I would suggest, just with the agreement, hopefully, of the seconder, that we put a full stop after year 10, because I don't think that those are the only activities of green corridors, but that was more the justification. So I would suggest that we just put a full stop so that it's just clearly a budget decision, noting that those were some of the rationales.
Sorry, councillors. Okay, I'll open it up for any comments. Councillor, can I just ask a question? So being increased to 90,000, what is it currently? What's the program? 60. So we're going from 60 to 60 to 90, so $30,000 increase. Okay.
Yeah, if I could just briefly comment through that as well. The cost of the seedlings for those longer-lived trees was actually double. So this is a 50% increase, but against a 100% increase of the cost of the seedlings that they're needing to get. So I think they're actually making some adjustments on their end as well, and this seems like a proportionate response to the need to keep this project well supported.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Yep, just to talk a little bit, some of the newer councillors may not be aware, but this is a very substantial programme that's been ongoing for some time, and it's been successful with a lot of volunteer input. It uses locally sourced seedlings to try and maintain the natural biodiversity of the area. And, you know, without us putting the money in to enable it to continue to develop, all of the initial work will just be wasted. So the idea of re-establishing native bush is that, you know, once you've got the ground cover in, that then the canopy trees can flourish. And if the canopy trees are not naturally seeded, then they have to be planted. There's a lot of work to be done around weed control and pest management to try and make sure that those canopy trees develop to a stage where they can be left on their own. And I think myself and the mayor a few years ago we went on a little tramp up and down the green corridors with the team, and it's a very impressive piece of work if you get the chance to have a look at it. So it seems a shame to me that for the want of a small budget increase, that we might lose ground on some of that really good work that's been done. You know, the green corridors has really contributed to the increase in bird life that we've seen in the city, and I think it's a very valuable natural resource that we should do our best to maintain.
Councillors, I support this. I've seen it firsthand. I think it's 17 years of work that this organisation, a volunteer organisation, has done, and they come from all walks of life, including some of our own staff members that volunteer as well. The work that they've done up in the Turatea is fantastic, and I think there's a before and after photo, and I think that just sums it up, where you've got a paddock with a gully and a stream, nothing there except a couple of fence posts, and then a photo 15 years later with regenerated natural bush, birds, everything else coming back, and I think it's just fantastic. And let's be honest, it's coming down through Massey and then to the Manawatu and where the urban eels is, and of course the plan is to come right through. So I mean, that's the longer term plan of this group. So I strongly advise you to support them. It's a little bit, but I think it's well worth the extra bit of funding. Councillor Dennison.
Yep, wholeheartedly support. A very minor increase for an ongoing piece of volunteer work, which we can take pride in. In fact, it's a legacy project that's going to be there for generations. Highly support.
Councillor Finlay.
I totally support this, and I'll do it in a way. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, in Palmerston North, you never saw a tui. Nowadays, you do.
You're talking about the birds, aren't you? Yeah, okay. Yeah, sorry. So it's long in the day, I thought I'd just try and see if you're all awake, and you are. All right. Any other comments? No? Back to you, Councillor.
Thank you for support. I'm not sure if there's new words coming to screen, but I do think it's a much cleaner recommendation if we end at full stop after years 2 to 10.
And then delete for purchase of.
And delete the rest of.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, let's vote. That has passed 14 votes for and none against. Councillors, we might just break now. Come back next year. Do you think anybody would notice? Anyway, okay. We'll break till 3:15. again in goal 4. So order of proceedings now, councillors, as we'll go through the remainder of these goals of goal 4. I'll then take any items from the floor, and we have a couple of extras to come in. Receive those, thank you. If you have something, please bring it up. It's got to be seconded, so we're not wasting people's time. Then we'll take any items from the officers, and I know there's 2 which we need to make a decision on that are in the document. Then we'll pull everything together, we make sure we decide we're happy with where we are, and then we'll move the substantive motion. Okay? Right. We are back to 5.3 in goal 4, and this again is a result of public consultation that officers report to council on costs and options for provision of 1 free rubbish bag per month to low-income households. That's from Councillor Barrett, seconded by Councillor Johnson. Over to you, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colleagues, this came through in several submissions, really people concerned about how we can support those who are on low incomes in our community, sort of households that have to make a decision between a rubbish bag and a loaf of bread, and wanting to make sure that we are doing right by those. Referencing earlier debate today, I'm trying not to jump to any end games here, but really just trying to have an open look at what might be possible and what the implications might be of that. So this is just asking for a report back on options and any associated costs. But look, there could be a range of delivery approaches here, things around community service card holders, perhaps out through food banks, perhaps out through community libraries, etc. Any of those things could come in as ways that we could actually meet the needs of, again, those very low-income households that are struggling with the cost of living, and some of that's reflected in the choices that they make around what they do with waste generated in their house. So we know that there's issues around waste being left on properties and quite unsanitary. We know that there's issues with contamination in our recycling bins and issues with use of parks and reserves rubbish bins as well for household waste. So this may go some way to addressing some of those issues, and I think it's something that we as a council should have a proper look at and understand the strengths and weaknesses of. I do realize this runs a bit counter to the principles of waste minimization in some ways, but it is a conscious response for the parts of our community that do have genuine need, and thinking about how we can meet their options within the context of a wider waste minimization strategy.
Thank you, Councillor. Just a question, and I know you've explained it pretty well, but low income, how do we determine low income? Are you not jumping to anything yet? You're open to that may be a community services card, it may be...
Yep. I deliberately leaving it open at this stage, right, because I, in consultation with and discussions with some colleagues even, couldn't quite land on exactly what it might look like. I think we should leave it to the experts with staff to bring us back some options.
Okay, good. All right, I'll just make a comment. Look, I do support this. I mean, it does, in one way, it does fly in the face of some of the waste minimisation programs and ways we've been working through that. But actually, some of the stats tell us that some of that isn't working. And certainly from the fly tipping, which just seems to get bigger and bigger. You just need to talk to any of our parks and reserves people or any of our people from the MRF, what they pick up, and it's incredible. And any of the volunteer groups that go through and do regular cleanups, it doesn't seem to be getting better. So if we can make some small difference here, I would, once we get the report back on what those options may be and the associated costs, I think it's worth considering anyway. All right. Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, just to say I'm happy to second this, because I do support us trying to make services free or low cost for people that really need that free or low cost option. And I think it would be quite interesting if we were able to do this for us to try and get some data around whether or not it did affect fly tipping, contamination rates and so on, so we could have a bit of an assessment as to whether or not it was worth continuing. I think that would be a useful aspect to it if that could be incorporated without too much extra cost. So I'm looking forward to seeing what officers come back with. But I think if you've got to change what you're doing if you want to get different outcomes. So here's an option of something new that we could do. It may or may not produce the results that we're hoping for, but we could give it a try and then try and assess whether it's done that.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Just a question to the mover. I think I understand from your introductory comments, but just to confirm that you're leaving the low income up to staff to determine, you're not requesting that they come back with a definition. I guess I'm confirming that we're not having a report on a report. What we're asking is actually they come up with what they're determining low income is, and they will just include that in their report when they report back as a whole? Or are you expecting them to come back with options on low income and then go back and do another?
Very much the former of those
They
two.
will determine the low income
Yes.
definition. Okay, great. Yep, happy to support this.
Councillor Michelada.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Chair. I think I had a similar question with the Deputy Mayor, so I'm going to remove myself.
Okay, no other comments? Right, we'll go back to you as right to reply. Councillor Barrett?
I don't think it's needed at this stage, thank you.
Okay, let's vote. It's passed, 14 votes for, none against. Right, we now move through to the next one, again as a result of public consultation, 5.3, that an action be added to the climate change plan for officers to work with local schools to support them in developing emissions tracking at a school level. That's come from Councillor Butt, seconded by Councillor Barrett. Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a straightforward recommendation just to create a culture of caring for our environment and working towards our target of making Palmy carbon neutral. I've been told that one of the schools in Palmerston North, Ross Intermediate, is one of the first schools who has attained the status of carbon zero or carbon neutral in New Zealand. So we can go a step forward and make Palmy a city in which all the schools are carbon zero or carbon neutral. And if you consider the previous programs we have already voted for, 1920, 1888. So if you consider the amount of money we have allocated to those programs, this program hasn't got any financial implications attached, because I have been told that the organization ECOS provides a free service to the schools, especially to the schools for their carbon inventory. And even if there is any financial liabilities, it will be, like we say, just the peanuts, not even the peanuts, just the amount of salt on the peanuts, if it is salted. So I would ask for your support. Thank you.
Support for the salt. Okay, sounds great. All right, Councillor Finlay.
Just a quick question. During submissions, did we not hear from Horizons and they're already doing something along these lines?
No, they're doing it, they've got Enviro.
I think that's a different program.
It's a different program,
Different thing,
Enviro
is it?
schools, yeah. David.
Yeah, look, while additional resource, acknowledged additional resource was approved on Wednesday for the space, I don't think we should underestimate the potential resource associated with working with schools in this space. We know from our own carbon inventories it's a significant data-heavy project that takes a significant amount of time. I think we should also be conscious that the government reforms in this space are going to be expecting the public sector agencies to be addressing this themselves. So these sorts of issues are best addressed, in our opinion, through the Ministry of Education en masse in terms of their expectations of schools.
Can I just ask you a question? Would it not be best that we even just corral them in the same direction?
I guess, our focus is addressing and continuing to reduce our corporate emissions, and working strategically with the city to reduce our citywide emissions. We know the most significant contribution to citywide emissions is transport. Where we have public sector organisations who are already demonstrating that they're working in this space and government are going to be asking them to work in this space, I think we have to really question about whether it's a good use of our own resources to be spending time working with schools.
Okay, we can make a political decision on that. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm really happy to support this recommendation. As Councillor Butt outlined, we've already got a school locally, Ross Intermediate, which is the first school in New Zealand to achieve carbon neutrality, and they worked with a social enterprise called ECOS in 2019 to create a schools calculator tool for schools to be able to calculate their own emissions. So some of the tools which would enable this work already do exist and are free for schools to access. I think the next step is providing some sort of connection or incentive or rewards program, which I know that Councillor Butts had some thought around, to encourage schools to be reducing their emissions. We've got a target as an organisation, and for our city we've got ambitions around reducing carbon emissions, and if we could tackle schools as an example, that would contribute quite significantly to it, especially as outlined that we know that transport is a massive contributor. If we can shift some behaviour from our youngest members of our community, we know that the influence that kids have on their family behaviours is also quite significant. So I think that whilst I appreciate that we don't understand the full resourcing required to achieve some of these, I think that the recommendation is a first step in including it in our plan, which can enable that next step of actually doing some further investigations. And some of it may actually just be around connecting schools with the right information for them to take the lead themselves on addressing this, but sometimes it just requires a little bit of coordination or actually a bit of information sharing that they may not currently have. So I'm happy to support this. I think that it gives some clear direction that this is really important to us at all levels in our community, and we've worked with local schools on a number of other projects, so I'm happy to include this as well.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think just having listened to the Deputy Mayor make a very clear and comprehensive case, the points that were there for me were really around acknowledging that our target here is a citywide target. Schools are very much part of our communities. We're active in this space. As we've heard, some of them are already active in that space. It certainly can't do us any harm to make these connections and see what's possible. I think the recommendation there is sufficiently open-ended that it gives us an opportunity to see how this develops and shape it further if we need to before we start to get into serious resource territory. We know that our biggest footprint as a city is around the transport side, and we know that a huge amount of that transport demand is driven by people driving kids to school.
Yeah, look, I will support this. I think we've got to start somewhere, and like the last two speakers, if we can do some influencing around schools and of course the families and the drop-offs, even the drop-offs may help. Well, I'm sure it's not a may, they will help. And then we can find out what the resourcing is thereafter. As simple as getting everybody on the right program too, and understanding what those, the data and understanding what their emissions reductions can be. I noticed at a regional chiefs meeting, some of our councils are doing different things in terms of how they're collecting data and measuring it. So just a simple thing as getting everybody on the same page and influencing some of the influencers, i.e. being the school kids who will influence their parents, I think could be where we should be able to start to see some change. Right, Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, my concern really, I guess, is just around sort of the potential implications of workload for officers. Can somebody just give me a little bit of clarity around, developing emissions tracking, is that really just software or advice or reference to a third party? I just really want to get a feel for that in terms of the implied work.
I'll go to the mover first, and then if the officers want to comment, they can comment thereafter.
I think that software is already available for free. You just need to put your name, your details, your mode of traveling and these kind of things. It's already available free of charge online. We are not spending anything on software or developing anything.
Okay, we'll go back to anyone else want to comment? No? Right, a reply, Councillor.
I think it will be a good way to create a sense of, number one, recognizing the schools who are already doing it and encouraging other schools by creating a sense of competition. So it's a win-win situation. I don't see very big resources required to implement this program. So I'll ask your support.
All right, we will vote. It has passed 13 votes for, one abstention. Right, we'll now move to, again, 5.3, as a result of public consultation, that Council agreed to fund $50,000 towards the Massey Botanical Gardens Master Plan in, Year 1, and Council provide written support of the project and funding request to Horizons Regional Council and the Manawatu River Leaders Accord, and that the funding in Years 2 and 3 be referred to the annual plan process. I've moved that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Councillors, I think this is quite a unique opportunity for us. I don't think there's anywhere else in New Zealand that has an organisation with the potential of this botanical gardens concept on their doorstep. They need some small amount of help from us. It's an ecosystem, excuse the pun, in the sense of funding this in a bigger way. It's a project which could link in with Horizons and also the Manawatu River Leaders Accord funding. They have a fund for this sort of thing, but of course it's in smaller pockets of money. We need to be a catalyst for it to help our partner in Massey University start to make some traction in this. It came to us via the Massey Foundation, and we've supported them around other projects like the Old Refectory, and that is about to open very shortly. You probably aren't aware of how significant that little bit of seed funding that we put in over 3 years was for them to get that project and catalyst underway. This is in a similar vein, but I actually think this has a lot more, attracts a lot more goals for us, certainly in the biodiversity and educational side as well. So I'll open it up for any comments. Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for bringing to us what I think is quite a prudent response to the request that we had from the Foundation for $300,000. And while we acknowledge that probably that amount of money could be used, I think this is an appropriate response that gets us a first step of evaluation and understanding of where this could go. But much like the Mayor, I think this does have really high potential over the long term to deliver for the city and of course for the university. I think if we look at a Manawatu River framework lens, this fits really, really well. If we look at a Food HQ lens, this also fits well. And if we think about making sure that Massey continues to be well anchored in our city, these are the sort of moves that we should be making. So I'd ask you to support it on that basis and really look forward to seeing what we get back through this and to having the opportunity to consider in years 2 and 3 what we advance.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sure the work has been done already, but can I just doubly confirm it's not in the line of a floodplain, some of the work that they were going in? I just wondered if I'd read something or someone made the comment. I just wanted to have a thought, or would this investigation just ensure that?
Look, I'm unsure myself. It is to connect to the Turatea stream. Not all of that is in the floodplain, but some of it is.
I was happy to support more, I think, again, like the green corridors, but even in another special way, being a botanic garden, being a starting seed of a legacy project again, and I would have funded more. My only reservation was whether or not it had risk around the floodplain, because I think that should have been considered, but if not, just raise it. Happy to support it.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I can't support this. It's easy to sit around this table and approve another 50,000 here or there and give it away, but I think we need to remember that that's another 50,000 that our community has to pay for. And I think we have to weigh these decisions heavily against, you know, what is the return to the ratepayers for that investment. And for me, I don't see a significant enough return to our ratepayers or benefit to our ratepayers from this. Of course, it'll be a nice garden, but we've invested significantly across the city, our reserves, and I think that's the priority for us. I think this is not a high priority for us.
Anybody else wishing to comment? Okay, I'll just do the right to reply. Look, I gather everybody is tired at the end of the day, and it is another 50,000 towards our rates bill. But actually, like some of the other projects, this is just where it fell. It could have been number one on the list. It's supporting a city partner in Massey University. I'll just do the numbers. I don't know how much they put into our GDP, but it would have to be towards $1 billion. Our amount of staff, 3,000. Amount of students, 15,000. This is a project which actually is quite unique to our city, and we're spending other projects and other money around the river framework, around our pathways, around Food HQ, around supporting other parts of the university. This is a natural link to that. The really cool thing about this is we'll just be one of the smaller partners in what will be, I think will be quite a New Zealand, if not an international sort of project. So I do think it's a small contribution towards what will be a larger project. So please give it some support to get it into the starting gates. Thank you. Right, if we could vote, please. That has passed 12 votes for, 1 against. Right, we'll move now to our final goal 4, and this is around a result of public consultation 5.3 that program 2055 Investigate EnviroHub be moved from year 3 to year 2, and program 1959 EnviroHub and Resource Recovery Centre be moved from years 4 and 5 to years 3 and 4. It's moved by Councillor Barrett, seconded by Councillor Johnson. Over to you, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colleagues, you will have had an email from me yesterday just outlining why this has come and why this has come now. It was only Wednesday this week that Ministry for the Environment announced that they were injecting another $6.4 million into this space, but that injection was tagged to years 1 to 4. It has been a long time since MFE has done this, and it may be a long time before MFE does this again. So the initial set of EnviroHubs around the country were set up on that initial injection, that sort of probably 15-ish years ago. We want to make sure that we're in the game for this second round. So all that this does is ensure that we have good alignment with potential funding partners. The 1959 program is actually tagged as being contingent on funding partners, so it's only sensible that we get alignment, and the easy way to do that is to vote this through. If it turns out that we need to then set the program back again, we can do that, but we should at this point definitely give ourselves the best chance of winning.
Thank you, Councillor. Look, I'll comment. I think it's wise to be aligned. There is no promises that money will come, but if we're not aligned, then we sure as heck aren't going to give ourselves the best opportunity. There is money in these funds now, and we've just got to make sure that we've put ourselves in the best position. I don't think there's any harm in moving these 1 year ahead. In fact, I think it's very favourable. So I'll be supporting this. Are there any other those wishing to comment? Back to you, Councillor Barrett, for any right or reply.
Right, thank you.
Okay, we will vote. And it's passed 13 votes for and none against. All right, our final one, we've got a few off the floor, but this is the final one on your papers, bottom of page 7, and this is the last of it, thank goodness. This is around, as a result of public consultation as well, that Council approve a $5,000 contribution towards the New Zealand World War Memorial in Lequenois in France. I just had to get my pronunciation right there. And that's moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Harper, who's not here. Thank you, Councillor Dennison. And look, I just want to, we had a submission from the Trust, and it's a pan-political trust in the sense that it has former Prime Ministers and central government politicians and other notable New Zealanders. And it's around honouring our fallen and those that gave in both world wars. To give an example, 10% of this city's population went to World War I, and not everybody came back, as we know, when you just need to read the names on the cenotaph out there, and of course many thousands in World War II. This is a very small contribution, which I think we should be there. Our neighbours are. Others are considering it in their LTPs at the moment, but Rangitikei has signed off on this, as has Tararua. Just asking for your support on this. It's a very small contribution, and as a defence city that has 2 defence bases and the New Zealand Defence College here, I think we should be there. I'll open it up for any comments. Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously supporting this, but can I ask what sort of amount the other councils have committed?
The other 2 councils, I believe, gave us exactly the same amount.
Okay, about that. Thank you.
All right, I'm not going to use my right of reply. I don't need to. You either vote for it or you don't. Thank you. That has passed 11 votes for and 2 against. Thank you. Okay, we now go to other. Okay, this has come off the floor, and it's a result of public consultation. This is from Councillor Naylor and second by Councillor Petrinas, and that program 86 around furniture replacements is combined with program 281. I'll go to you, Councillor Naylor.
Mr Mayor, could I just ask that the other one be taken first, because this probably doesn't make a lot of sense without talking to the other one.
All right, we'll give staff a few moments. Excuse me. Okay, again, as a result of public consultation, that program 281, Civic Administration Building Renewals, is amended so that 500,000 from each of years 1 and 2 is deferred to years 4 and 5. So again, that's from Councillor Naylor, seconded by Councillor Petrinas. Over to you, Councillor.
Thank you. Look, we've spent a good 12 or 13 hours here considering many submissions that have asked us to add things in, and that's certainly pushed our rates increase up for the first year, and I'm mindful of the impact that has on many in our community, particularly those on fixed and low incomes. Along with those submissions, there were a number of submissions outlining to us the impact of those rates increase, asking us to spend less and reduce the rates increase. I mean, what I'm proposing today only makes a very small difference, but I at least think it's worth our consideration. So just looking over, and the other background to this, I guess, just to mention is, you know, what we became aware of through the workshops was, and through all of this, is the significant increase in the whole area of renewals, and that's obviously come at a big price, particularly in year 1 and 2, where the weight of that increase has fallen. So this program is got quite big budgets currently in the, in the current plan of year 1, 1.2 million, in year 2, 1.179 million. What I'm proposing here is to push out 500,000 from year 1 and 2 and put that into year 4 and 5. Now, I've looked at the program today, and it is a bit of a mixture of things that are quite important and things that are perhaps less important. And just a few examples, there's some 400 in the 2 years. There's 400,000 worth of ceiling tile replacements, 450,000 of carpet, and there's 200,000 of general CAB renewals. There's also some quite important things. Well, it's all important, but some perhaps more urgent things such as fire safety upgrades of 600,000 over the 2 years, and water tightness 600 over those 2 years. So certainly we absolutely need to leave enough in there to do some of those health and safety concerns. But looking at the program, I felt comfortable that there was enough in the budget, even with this pushing this out, to for that budget to be reprioritised to address the most important things in the early years, and then do some of those other things in the outer years. It's relevant to also mention the next recommendation also proposes amalgamating the two. There's another renewal program which is Program 86, which is furniture replacement, which has a further $100,000. And the next recommendation, I'll just briefly explain that now so that it makes some sense. I think it makes sense to give the Chief Executive more flexibility to be able to prioritise within the budgets that are there. The 100,000 furniture replacement might not be as important as something else within the CAB renewal, so combining that just perhaps adds to that level of flexibility. But for now, I'm happy to, hopefully I've explained that well enough. There is the numbers outlined over the 5-year period. Nothing changes in year 3, but with that additional 500,000 that's taken out of year 1 and 2 added to the amounts in year 4 and 5.
All right, thank you, Councillor. CE wishes to speak.
So I will start by just limiting my comments to some of the items that Councillor Naylor addressed, including ceiling tiles. These ceiling tiles are actually seismic. We've got seismic issues with them, and so bracing issues around that. These aren't nice to haves. These are actually really important, and they are part of our response to earthquake-prone buildings. Their water tightness as well. We mentioned things like furniture. Feels a little bit like Groundhog Day, because I feel like I say this every year. We prioritise a number of things in our budgets. We talk a lot about the importance of health, safety and well-being of our staff, and yet we continue to lose staff because we do not have appropriate facilities. It's part of it, not all of the reasons, and that are actually expected in a modern day work environment. This is we ignore renewals and we ignore upgrades at our peril.
Can I just ask a few questions of that? So, and maybe it's not through you, Heather, maybe to the property. Carpet and furniture, and we're not talking about stopping this, are we, Councillor? We're just talking about deferring it. Yeah. So that's not due to seismic.
No, For context for the furniture, the average lifespan of furniture is about 15 years. The average life of our furniture in this building is 30. So it's actually double, and in many cases it's failing at a exponential rate.
I see it going out the door down the bottom, yeah. So exactly. I know. But we have replaced quite a bit, haven't we?
Well,
somebody's been moving furniture.
There is plenty, but it is in a response to failing furniture primarily.
Right.
Same thing with the carpet. The carpet is coming to the end of its life and needs replacing.
Okay, cool. Just want to get the context around that, that's all. Okay, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of questions for the mover first. So just with the suggestion for year one, can you tell me what figure would be left? Is that 700?
Yeah.
And with the breakdown that gives in the original program budget that gives the cost, what was the cost associated with the ceiling tiles?
200 each year for year 1 and 2.
Okay, thank you. So then just a comment, if I may. I'm going to oppose this. The breakdown in the program budget of supporting material that was given to us outlined that 500k was the cost for fire safety, 300k for water tightness, and we've just heard the ceiling tiles being 200k, so that's seismic strengthening. So fire safety, water tightness and seismic strengthening doesn't seem like any nice to have element for me at all, and so that alone is works out to be $1 million there. So I'm not going to support deferring. I appreciate that some of this might be seen as nice to haves if we're talking about furniture replacement, but a huge component of this actually seems to be really critical basic infrastructure for this building. So I can't support deferring that. And I really struggle with the idea that we sit through meetings, particularly through finance and audit, where we receive the health and safety report. We talk about staff well-being and supporting staff in the workplace, and we, relay our concerns and our efforts around that. And then we come into environments like this where we're talking about the environment that our staff are working in. So, we talk about voting with our wallet. That's how we talk about our community engagement. And I think that's actually a way to vote right now, is actually these budgets are significantly going to impact and already do the staff and the environment our staff are having to work in. So I'm not going to support these deferrals. I appreciate the efforts that Councillor Naylor's going to try and tidy up some of these rate increases and looking at actually the impact on that on our community. But these decisions around this recommendation actually significantly impact our staff. So I just don't think that it's okay to talk about well-being in one sense, but actually then make decisions that impact people's well-being in another. So I'm going to oppose this. And I'll oppose the next recommendation just to save me on speaking on that. My views stand for that as well.
Councillor Bodie.
Yes, I'm just going to duplicate and enforce what the Deputy Mayor and the CE has said. I get a bit tired at the poor staff and their furniture. And I mean, some of the furniture around this place, when you look at it, it's not that great. I mean, look at the councillor desk in here, but it's back to environment. But it's back to an environment and keeping staff and trying to recruit staff in a good environment. So it's been said, and I'm just disappointed that we're having a go at this so late in the day.
All right, anybody else would like to comment? Oh, I will. Look, I was up for having a discussion about this. I wasn't up for having a discussion about critical stuff, but carpet and some furniture. I see the furniture that sometimes leaves here, and we've repurposed it in other organisations. Yes, you're right. It is of an era that is probably not the most modular or the best working environment, but if we could sweat the asset a couple of more years and keep the rates down another %, then it's probably worth the discussion. But look, if it's critical, then perhaps we do have to spend the money. I'll just leave it at that. Councillor Jennison.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't going to speak, but along the lines of what you've shared, that I'm up for some review around carpet and some furniture. And when we've looking at what other options we've got, at just under 8% rate increase for the next financial year, it's one that I think is worth considering when we want to cut, which would cut several point percentage rates down. So I'm going to support this in the notion that this is on the basis of the carpet and the furniture being deferred, and heaven forbid that we start reducing library book budgets and stuff as a consequence. Thank you.
All right, no other people wishing to comment? Back to you, Councillor Naylor.
Yeah, I totally support the fact that we need to keep critical things in the budget. I think what I'm proposing here is the ability to take some less not critical things and push them to have to wait a few years. And I think that's the reality of all of many people in our community who live on fixed budgets. There is really strong arguments for every single thing that's in this plan, and there's very strong arguments for everything else that we've considered and everything else that people have submitted. If we do every single thing that has a strong argument for it, our rates will not be affordable for our community. So I think part of our job is to sometimes make the hard decisions. And I'm not suggesting that anything in this program that we shouldn't have it. I'm just saying perhaps we can wait a few years. The context of this also, just to add, there are also capital new workplace transformation budget of $500,000. There's also, there's a lot of other budgets where the essential things can be, a lot of that. I guess I don't know if anyone else did this exercise, but last night I looked at our last 10-year plan and I thought, where are all these increases coming from? Goal 3 has had very little attention. When you compare this page to the page we looked at 3 years ago, these are the budgets that have blown out. These are the budgets that were $500,000 then and are $3.5 million now. So, I mean, that's why I looked at this area and I thought, yep, maybe that's a practical and prudent way of bringing the rates down just ever so slightly, because I think a lot of the things we have added in certainly do have some value, but I'm certainly not comfortable with where we've landed with the rates increase. So look, I'd urge you to support this.
Councillor, can I just get some context here before I make my moral decision? You are talking here, is that amended so that 500,000 is deferred, it's not taken out, it's deferred, and we're talking carpet, aren't we, in this?
Mr. Mayor, that was one of the examples I used, there's the whole program here in our papers that you can have a look at. The fire safety upgrades that the Deputy Mayor mentioned was 600 over 2 years. It has got 500 in the first year and 100 in the second year. Things like that are essential, but perhaps that can be done over 2 years. There are definitely some important things in there. There are some less than important things in there. And I haven't tackled, that's why I've tackled just some of the budget.
Yep.
So it does leave 700,000.
Okay, I've got Bryce behind you, he might be able to answer it.
Just a point of clarification. So year one, due to cost escalations, literally we are doing 3 things. One is $200,000 for water tightness, $500,000 for fire upgrades, and $500,000 for the seismic bracing in the ceilings and tiles. That literally is all we're doing in year one.
So
the whole 1.2.
So there's no carpet in that?
Not in year one. No, we've had to already reprioritise things to try and accommodate for the cost escalations which we're experiencing in the market.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, the information that we've been provided in our program summary is quite different to that.
That was back in January.
Okay, so that's a bit confusing. So where's the carpet?
The carpet is, on this program that we've been given, 350,000 in year 2, 100,000 in year 1, so it's 450,000 over year 1 and 2.
Okay, so most of it's in year 2.
Most of it is at this stage, but there definitely will not be $100,000 in year 1.
Okay. You don't want to amend your...
Mr. Mayor, would you like to amend it?
I think I'm up for having a discussion about this, but I don't want to chop out some critical stuff. I'm hearing that from the officers, and I take them on their word, that this is critical year 1, but year 2 is possibly where, in year 2, I think we can do that in an annual plan, to be honest. Yeah.
I'd be happy to amend it if that's what you're asking me to consider to 400,000, and also give consideration that the second recommendation gives increased scope to the Chief Executive to utilise the 100,000 that's allocated to furniture replacements, because my view is that could be pushed out or brought forward depending on what is the most important thing. I think there's enough scope and enough money in there if we reduce it by 400,000. Combined with the next recommendation, I'm confident that that should give scope to do the high important things.
I think we leave it as it is. And look, we've had the right reply, we've kicked it around. I think we just vote on this one. All right, can you vote, please? And it's failed, 4 votes for and 9 against. Right, we'll come to the second one. So this is a result of public consultation that Program 86 furniture replacements is combined with Program 281. Back to you, Councillor Naylor, and that's seconded by Councillor Petrinas.
Yeah, thank you. I think even though the previous recommendation wasn't supported, I think there is good sense in doing this to increase the flexibility of the Chief Executive to address the most important things first. Furniture, in my mind, is something that could wait a year or 2 if there are higher priorities within CAB. So that's the purpose of this recommendation. It doesn't change anything in terms of what's committed, but it does give the Chief Executive additional flexibility.
Councillor, can I just ask that the numbers, what are the dollar values with Program 86 and 281?
86 is 100,000,
yes.
And 281 is now still 1.2 million.
Right. And also, could I ask a question? So what, I'm just going to, how does it reduce? It says that Program 86 furniture replacements is combined with Program 281. It doesn't actually inform.
The main reason I had included this was to support the first recommendation in terms of accommodating reprioritisation of some of the spend. It may not be as relevant now, but it could. I'm not sure if the Chief Executive has a comment of whether that would be useful. Otherwise, I'm happy to withdraw it.
It needs something extra in it, I think.
No, not particularly useful. I'm happy for it just to stay as Program 86. Is that? Yeah.
Okay, does anybody else want to comment on this? Okay. Back to you, Councillor Naylor, for a right of reply.
That's fine.
Okay, cool. And we're voting. Oh, sorry?
I'm sorry, Mr Mayor, I may have misunderstood. I thought this was being withdrawn.
Oh.
Are we actually voting on it now?
I don't know what it is, so I'm It's been a long day, so I'll go back to you, councillor. What would you like to do? Would you like us to vote on this, or would you like to withdraw it?
There's no point.
Okay.
I'm happy to withdraw.
Okay, we're withdrawing it. Okay, all right, we're through that. We've got one more, okay. Okay, so as a result of public consultation, that program 1949 Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan is deferred to year 2. So Councillor Naylor, seconded by Councillor Dennison, and if you want to speak to that.
Thank you. I think given all the additional work that we've put on officers through the as a result of the recommendations that have been approved today and Wednesday, there's an awful lot that has to be done in year 1. This piece of work is worth $250,000. I don't think there has been a submission asking for us to progress this work. As far as I'm aware, we have had submissions asking us to consider our rates increase. I think deferring this prioritises the other work. I think we've got enough on our plate in year 1. This is just deferring it to year 2, and then it could get considered as a part of the annual budget next year.
Okay, I'll open it up for comments. Councillor Barton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted through you to seek an officer comment, because my understanding is this is a contract which has just been recruited for.
We're in the process of confirming a consultant to undertake the work. A more general comment, I guess, is that we have significant earthquake-prone issues with the library, Te Manawa, parts of this building. We have a variety of private interests looking at hotel developments that could complement investment in the civic and cultural precinct that are looking for certainty. I know earlier today we brought the investigations for the Enviro Hub, which is part of this work, into year 2, so we need some direction around that. The other thing about getting this work underway in year 1 is that we'll get results during the course of the next 3 years that can actually inform budgets and programs and planning for the next LTP. So it's recommended that the program stays in year 1.
Thank you. So to comment, Mr. Mayor, what he said, there actually were submissions that spoke very strongly in favour of the Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan and its current timing. Specifically, off the top of my head, the submissions from Te Manawa and Square Edge Community Arts both referenced this piece of work as they thought absolutely fundamental to establishing the future of this part of the city and the place that their buildings, all of which, bar one, are earthquake-prone, play in the civic and cultural life of the city. So I can't support this being pushed out, especially when we have a process underway to get a consultant in to do this work.
Yeah, I suppose. Look, I mean, regardless of whether there's a process in place, because it's actually a decision of us now. That money hasn't been spent yet, or one would hope. But look, I'm of the same view. I mean, how much is this? 250? Yeah. Yes. So look, I appreciate that we're trying to make some cuts, and I was more than interested in having a look where we can do that. This is probably the wrong one, to be honest. So I can't support it at this stage, but I do appreciate that we're trying to make some dent in that rate increase. Okay, is there any other comments to this? Okay, back to you, Councillor.
Thank you. I think one of the other considerations about this program that hasn't always sat well is that we've already spent a significant amount on a draft civic and cultural precinct master plan draft that wasn't approved by the council. I don't know why we'd, $250,000, I know we've added the library in, but $250,000 does seem an awful lot of money to get another report when we've already had a big report, an expensive report. So it doesn't sit well. I don't think it's a priority. I'm certainly happy to defer it if it's important enough. Yeah, certainly it could get done at a later date. And look, I can't just not say this. It's easy for others to say, yes, it would be good to cut some things, but I'm not hearing any other suggestions from around the table, and I think that is disappointing to me. I think, yes, it's late, it's 4:10 on our second day, but we've spent most of our time increasing the rates, and we haven't, I'm not seeing a lot of effort to try and look at how we can actually minimise the impact of those rates. I think this is one option, and I urge you to support it.
All right. Thank you, Councillor. We will vote. And that is failed 4 votes for and 9 against. Okay. This is from our original papers, Deliberations report. So it's attachment 5, item 5. Okay.
Could someone outline a page?
Okay, page 98. It's around Capital New. It's program 2026. So that needs to be altered on the screen. It's program 2026, active transport measurement. This is increasing it, and Councillor Naylor will be pleased to know that I won't be moving this, to put an extra 800,000 into the budget. And currently it has in the draft 2021, 22 years 200, and then 24, 25 is another 200, 27, 28 is another 200, total of 600. The officer's recommendations are we increase that to 1.4 million, giving it 200,000 in each of the next 7 years. So I'm not going to move it, but is there anybody willing to move it? Or, okay, Councillor, is there a seconder? Okay. So you're seconding this?
Yes, because I've got questions, so yes, I'll second it.
Okay, all right. Councillor Barrett's moving it, and the Deputy Mayor is seconding it. Councillor Barrett, do you want to speak to it?
I really just wanted to ask some questions first to understand the process. I'm surprised that we've jumped back in here. I thought we had dealt with all this stuff ahead of time, so I think if we could get a little bit of context around where we're actually at in the process would be really helpful. And then also, obviously, an explanation of what this is.
Okay, so these are items, as I said earlier, these are items from the officers. We didn't move them, we left these two because they do have some substantial increases in them. And I may get one of the officers to perhaps talk us through why.
No, that's exactly right. These have been identified separately because they're scope changes in terms of what we're asking for, whereas the other stuff in that same appendix was around a deliverability review, which is a different, I guess, category. So we thought it wise to treat these on their own. What is important for context is that these numbers are already in the results that you see on the board, and so if they don't pass, we'll we'll be reducing the numbers on here a little bit.
Okay.
And through the chair, to give context, when we did the deliverability review, these two items were items where we realised that there'd been an omission in the scope that came out through the deliverability review. For this one in particular, we'd only got money to measure the effectiveness of what we were doing in the active transport area once every 3 years, which meant that 2 years out of 3, we actually wouldn't be picking up the data that showed whether what we were doing was effective to be able to manage and tweak the programme as we implemented the active transport programme.
Okay. Do you want to speak to it, Councillor?
Yes, thank you to the Mayor and to staff for clarifying this, and I think it's gives me some comfort knowing that it is not going to be increasing that number to leave this in, and as I understand it, there was an oversight in the development of papers and plans. That is really why this is now here, and I wouldn't want to see us punishing ourselves for an oversight of. Since joining council, have had concerns that we haven't had good data actually in the active transport space and understanding the trends there. I know we asked once for a report to council on it, which generated a small Excel graph that was a little bit hard to interpret and only had a few points on it. I think we are data poor here, and we do need to understand what is happening in our city transport system, including the active transport side of it. And so I'd encourage colleagues to support this on the basis that it will help us understand our transport systems, that it is within the numbers that are already on the board, and that it's come to us on staff recommendation.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got a question for the officer, if that's okay. I'm just trying to understand. So the program is for the measurement of what we're doing in that space. So it's just data analysis, $200,000 per year for data analysis every year, data collection. Sorry, it's probably the time of day as well, but I'm just kind of trying to understand the price tag compared with what the program is.
Yeah, through the chair, it is it is all the things like traffic sensors and cycle user sensors and things like that that actually collect more than quite a lot of our data at the moment is someone goes out and does a count, or whether it's a day or a weekend, they do a count for an hour or two, or this is actually getting equipment that will pick up and sensor on an ongoing basis, so that we can actually pick up behaviour changes that come from the active transport network, not just have a day in time. So it's actually going to give us more, I suppose, live data, but that data will then be fed back into the programme as part of the design of the ongoing programme.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Sorry, I can't support this level of investment just to measure stuff. Yep, I'm sure it would be of value to us, but we've just got to weigh that up against what is another 800,000, and so no, I won't be supporting it.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you. I was confused about how this was capital new rather than operational. I think that's been answered. But what I took from the comment about why this programme was needed is because it was lumpy and you wanted something every year. So couldn't we take the existing budget and just spread it out rather than adding more to it?
Through you, Chair. The $200,000 year on year is for, let's imagine we've got a certain number of streets. We can only do so many streets with the 200,000. We have a network that we're trying to look at. So we're looking at, so yes, it was lumpy, and we found that measuring once every 3 years isn't giving us real-time data to enable decisions around design and use for things like cycleways.
So is the bigger issue the lumpiness or the amount of money? Does it help to smooth it?
No, we'll need the $200,000 each year because we are required to do, well, we are wishing to do, for want of a better word, more streets to add into the network of capturing the data.
Yeah, okay, I hear you want to do more. What I'm asking, I suppose, is would it be better to have a budget in every year than a budget as was in every other year?
Through you, Chair, it would be better to have it year on year because then we can refer to year on year data when we're doing the public consultation on things like cycle upgrades.
Okay, thank you. So I think if this fails, sorry, long day, I'll move that the existing budget be spread equally over the years involved to at least address the lumpy issue. And I'm sure that is the wrong word for it, but I've got no words left.
Okay, Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will support this, and this is not just about the collection of, it's buying equipment to be able to measure the data. And I mean, we're growing, we've got Tamakuku coming up, we've got all these subdivisions coming up, and we're making multi-million-dollar decisions around things like cycleways and road redesigns. So if we can collect the data and have good data that we're making decisions, you'll be saving the $200,000 because you'll be making good decisions because you'll have the data. So sometimes it's in the planning of what you're doing, of having good data to make good decisions. Whereas if you haven't got the data, you make bad decisions, and in the end it costs you more money because you're redoing things. So I will support it, and it's already in the 7.95. So, and it's around, a lot of this is around safety, it's around the community demands around different roading areas. So I don't have a problem. It's our basic infrastructure that we need the data to collect on.
Before I go back to Councillor Barrett, look, I won't be supporting this, but I'm quite prepared to support an amendment of a different level of investment, even slightly higher. This is 1.4 million to collect data, of which we then spend more money on the actual assets. I get the whole reason about having data, but surely there's a better, more efficient and economic way to do this. This is Palmerston North, not New York. So, you know, where our rates are looking, we're going to put ourselves into a position soon, and we do need to look at where we can trim something. So I get that we need to do this. If this fails, I'd be quite happy to support a new motion of some form of investment that's slightly improved, but not at 1.4 million. Councillor Barrett, back to you for right reply.
Thank you to colleagues for comments on this. Still very much of the view that this is a good investment. I think the good planning argument that Councillor Beattie brought to us is actually one cornerstone of that. I think another argument that's there for me is really helping with a bit of the myth busting. You think about how many times we've heard in this chamber or from submitters or on social media about I never see a cyclist anywhere. And then we put a measurer on the bridge, Hearakatahi. We have hundreds of thousands of cyclists, right? So, I mean, you actually just need to start measuring things. And we should be in a position where we're strong enough to bust some of the myths out there in this community, and that will help do that as well. I think the third thing that I'd raise in asking for your support for this is, you know, when we started off Wednesday morning, sort of first out of the gates, we found out that active transport was quite a soft target. We could hit footpaths, we could hit cycle lanes. We've already had a hit at the front of this, and we shouldn't keep using active transport as a soft target to keep on artificially keeping rates below the level that actually meet our needs for planning and that meet the needs for the community The number's already in there. This is capital new. It'll be useful equipment and useful information. I'd ask you to support it on that basis.
All right, thank you. We'll vote, please. And it is passed, 7 votes for and 6 against. Okay, we now come to the next one, which is a total new budget, and as a result of a reassessment of the project scope, that 300,000 be included in year 3 and 1.5 million be included in year 4 for program 1440, Cuba Street Urban Streetscape Improvements, stage 4. I don't know anything about this, so can an officer speak to this?
Through the chair, again, through the deliverability review, it became apparent that there wasn't a budget for the top end of Cuba Street streetscape in there, which was a surprise to us. So we've put it in to be part of the budget to finish off Cuba Street. It's called stage 4, but it's actually stage 3, but it just wasn't in the existing budget.
I know where it is. So it's from the Pitt Street, is it Burke Street through, and past the Maori Battalion Hall, past Arena's new entranceway. Yeah. Oh, I was going to move it with an amendment. No, so look, can I just say that this is out of sync with what could possibly be happening around Arena. So if it was year 4 and year 5, it starts to line up with what is in the plans around Arena. Otherwise, it's ahead of what's happening there.
Through the chair, very happy to move it. Very happy to move it. We just wanted to include it in the budget, so it was there.
So I'd like to move, if the second is okay, this be included in year 4, 300,000 in year 4, and 1.5 in year 5. All right. Okay, I'll open it up for any other comments. There being none, we'll vote. Okay, that's passed 11 votes for and 2 against. Okay. Right, we're going to go to the substantive motion. Where is that? Oh, okay. Okay. Final deliberations report for the 2021-31 10-year plan and associated strategies and policies that the committee recommends. Number 5, that the Chief Executive be instructed to prepare a draft of the final 10-year plan for consideration by the Committee of Council on 23rd of June 2021 and that it incorporate the recommendations of the Committee of Council meeting of the 9th of June 2021 substantive. I'll look to move it, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments. There being none. Oh, no. Okay, there is, sorry. Shouldn't rush these things. Councillor Dennison.
I'm okay. I was just thinking whether it's going to go to council anyway, so we've any minor amendments, but I'm fine.
Councillor Naylor.
Just very briefly, it wasn't fundable or affordable for many of our community before we started, and it's certainly not fundable or affordable for our community now, so I won't be supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor. Look, I'll make a comment. I agree, there's real challenge here, and you could sense that towards the end of the day where we're trying to make some changes. So vast majority of this is around the infrastructure of things that need to be done. I'm unsure where we can make some decent cuts in this without absolutely deferring or kicking the can down the road with some crucial bits of infrastructure and work that needs to be done. The other thing that sort of gets lost in translation a little bit is we've reacted, I think, really positively to submissions. A lot of people have submitted on things that's really important to them, and they might have been small things here and there, and I know they do add up, but they will be taken positively. We have thought about people, various groups across many sectors, and that I commend you for holding your nerve when you could have defaulted into a shell and done nothing. So well done to the councillors and to the officers for bringing things forward. It is challenging at 7.95, and I really don't think we had a lot of choice outside some very minor tweaks, but you've done well and appreciate that. Thank you. Councillor Finlay.
Yeah, I feel very disappointed at the rates at 7.95, and I voted for stuff to go in as well. Unfortunately, things like superannuation don't go up by 8% a year. People on super now are looking at our budget and they see a 24% plus increase over 3 years. I can wager you any amount of money you like, superannuation will not go up 24% over the next 3 years. I don't know how much longer people on super can afford to continue to live with rate rises. I met a guy this week and he was in tears. He had just taken a reverse mortgage to help pay his living expenses. And he's a man whose wife died just recently. He lives alone. He's on super and he has to put a reverse mortgage on his house to make ends meet. Just think on that, please.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we shouldn't be that too disappointed. If we consider the forced capping of the rates in the last year, I don't think this 7.95 is the real increase. If we consider that we were going to increase last year, it is not an what you call a considerable increase. So I'm satisfied what we have done.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to say that we were not forced to cap the rates last year. The councillors voted for the rate increase last year. Nobody's comfortable with rate increases, but when you look across all the areas, all those goals, there's a pretty good balance in there. I was disappointed we couldn't spend more money on the roading and infrastructure, but there's a huge amount of community money gone into there. When you look at the percentage, we've increased some of the grants, the reserves, huge amount of money. And there's a lot of money in there that's going to for things that the ratepayers do not have to pay for. So they are paying for these things within their rates. I mean, just to look at free rubbish bags and things like that sort of stuff, it's going to we've focused, $7 million extra budget for social housing. That's not, that's for our lower income people. So I think we've done a pretty good balance, and at the end of the day, I'd like to see it 1%, but it's just not possible. Plus, we've also covered a huge amount of increase in costs. You forget that when, the amount of money that, I've said it before with the increases in things like the dog pound and all that sort of stuff, everything that's come to council, and now we've allowed that for the budget, so I'll be quiet because I know you want me to.
Was the body language telling you that, was it? Okay. Councillor McLeod.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Very pleased to support this. I think we've done a great job, and it wasn't easy as well for, I mean, these are things that are also important to members and groups in our community. I think we should see this as an investment for now and also into the future. And I also want to commend our officials for the great work that they've done in bringing this up to us. Personally, I mean, we've struck a good balance with a rate of 7.995, and it's not, you know, overly ambitious, that sort of thing, but I think we did strike a good balance, and we should see this as an investment. Everything that we've deliberated, we should see it as an investment in the city, and also in achieving some of the goals that we've set for ourselves, because they do require money and they do require expenditures. So, good job.
Councillor Barn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think my reflection at this point, at the end of 2 very long days, is that we knew we'd be here at the end of 2 days. We knew this when we started off on this journey, that there was a mountain of work in front of council that we needed to, I think you said, Mr. Mayor, hold our nerve because of the infrastructure renewals issues primarily that have led into where we are. And I think we have been prepared to look those in the face and make some really difficult decisions. And when we talk about difficult decisions, that often comes in the context of deciding not to do things to keep rates down. But this time, that conversation has been really different. The difficult decisions have been deciding to do things and to front that to our community and explain why we have decided to go with this level of rates increase. And I don't think any of us are happy about that, but I think if we've done our homework, we can all explain it. And that, for me, is the most important thing, that where we've got to today is thoughtful. None of this has been easy. We've put significant work into getting here. And in the long run, I hope our community thank us for it, because we did it for them.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm really happy to support the recommendation and approve our draft of the final 10-year plan. When I think back to our launch of the draft, we talked quite heavily around the fact that this was a 10-year plan that was an investment 10-year plan. It was largely an investment in infrastructure and actually bringing our investment up to speed where it had potentially been lacking over the years. When I was out in the community talking to people about that, and they would ask what were the exciting things coming through the 10-year plan, it was a little bit of a struggle to list off things, especially if I reflect back to our last 10-year plan, which had some really exciting projects within it. And so I was talking to people about the fact that actually this was really an investment in the important infrastructure that we can't see. I think now, though, the point that we've landed on is, yes, there's absolutely still an investment in our infrastructure, but we have flipped that, and it is also a massive investment in our people. I completely acknowledge the points that Councillor Naylor made around the affordability for many people with this, but actually I think that some of the significant decisions that we have made are going to impact on the most vulnerable members of our community. We have approved the living wage, we've doubled our social housing, we've put massive money in for climate action, increased strategic priority grants, small grants for community organisations. We've kept our rents in our social houses. We are looking at investigating free buses for vulnerable low-income members of our community. We're looking at a night shelter. Removing library fines. There are huge decisions that we have made that actually go towards addressing issues that our vulnerable members of our community face. So I acknowledge that the people who are paying for this certainly are going to, in some instances, will struggle with that. But I hope that upon reflection, they can see the good work that is coming out of the decisions that we have made. And actually, I think that I would happily say now that this 10-year plan is an investment in infrastructure, but it is significantly an investment in our people.
All right, I'll just finish off. Look, I've just done a little Google search to see where we are with our metros. Hamilton, 8.9. Dunedin, 9.8. Wellington, 13.5. Auckland, who have a 5% plus a water, plus a transport, double digits. Tauranga, 12%. Commercial, 39%. Palmerston North, 7.95. So I think that does say something. The majority of this is infrastructure. I think the Deputy Mayor has summed up well in saying what we've also done around housing, climate, but also I think that it's on balance. We've listened to our community as well. It is really, really hard to balance the books here in any territorial authority or city in New Zealand, and there will need to be quite a change in the way our funding tools, and I believe with the future of local government and the government's looking at reforms, that adjustment will have to be made at some stage. It just won't be able to continue in this space. But we only can control what we can control at the moment, and I think we've done a pretty good job of trying to keep that balance, listening to our community. I think we've really supported some of our people that have asked, for some things that, like the Deputy Mayor has spoken about, whether it be capping 25% of social housing rents, some of the other smaller programs that we've backed. I think that's been, in some ways, quite brave and something to actually be proud of as well. It is a challenge at 7.95, and I'm sure the critics will follow as well. But when you look at what we've done and had to do, and what the little bit that we really did have to play with, it's been a pretty good balanced effort. So thank you everybody for your support during the last several months, as it's turned out, by doing all of this. It feels like Groundhog Day, but we are here. So I'll now ask you to vote, please. And that has passed 12 votes for and 1 against. So finally, thank you again, everybody. Thank you to the staff. Well done. And I'll close the meeting. Kia ora. Thank you.